What's up everyone, who are you all? Today we are back with another blazing Naruto story. What if Naruto was banished and returned with infinite chakra? If you enjoy, then please like, share and do comments. And also check the description to original creator for this beautiful creation. Naruto sat in front of a campfire. He looked at the flames in contemplation. Earlier that day, he had fled from the snake Sanin with his teammates and his prize Kabuto. Being the only one awake, he wasn't able to reach Konoha, although he had passed Fire Country border long ago. Because of the lack of noise nearby, Naruto was immediately aware of someone waking up. He looked over his shoulder to see Yamato scratching his eyes in a sleepy manner. After a while, Yamato looked around himself and noted that he was in a forest, probably in Fire Country, as he was used to the kind of trees found there. Panic suddenly held him as he remembered the situation he was in before losing consciousness. While assessing his surrounding and formulating a possible plan to escape, he took notice of his subordinate Naruto calmly looking at him. He was at first afraid that Naruto was captured alongside them, but then he remembered that he was in Fire Country. He took a deep breath to rein in his warrior instincts and looked at Naruto. "How long was I out?" "About 5 hours, Naruto replied, still looking at his leader. He was waiting for the questioning that would come. Fortunately, he already had a cover story planned. Surprisingly, the first thing that Yamato did wasn't to question him like he expected. Instead, he rose from the ground with great difficulty as he hadn't recovered all of his motor skills and rummaged through his pants looking for something. Upon finding what he was after, he removed it from his pocket, showing to Naruto wire strings. While searching for those, he walked toward the third member of the rescue team, and now he stood above Sai. He then proceeded to bind the latter in a way that would restrict most of his movements. Naruto looked at the proceeding with a surprised look. He didn't understand what was going on and why Yamato was treating Sai like a prisoner, and was quick to voice his questions. "What is going on, Yamato, sensei?" With his back facing Naruto, Yamato continued what he was doing. "I am binding Sai so you won't make a run for it when you wake up. I can see that you know. My question is, why are you doing this?" Yamato looked back at Naruto, surprised by the question, before a look of understanding came to his face. "Oh, I forgot you weren't with us when this happened. You see, this ninja," he pointed at Sai as he said that, "betrayed us when you were fighting against Orochimaru. Apparently he had another mission given to him by someone other than Hokage-sama. He will have to explain himself to Tsunade-sama upon our return. That is why I am restraining him in case he tries to escape before we are back home." He wasn't sure if he understood completely what Yamato said, but Naruto nodded all the same. Once Yamato finished restraining Sai, he walked back toward the campfire before taking a sit in front of Naruto, the fire being the only thing keeping them apart. "Where are we right now, and for that matter, how did we get here?" Yamato finally asked after a minute of silence. "Here we go. Let's see if I am still as good an actor as I was in my youth," Naruto thought while looking at Yamato in the eyes. "We are inside Fire Country, and to answer your second question, I carried the three of you with the help of my clones. What happened then? When I woke up, I found myself in an underground hideout. I didn't know how I came to be there, so I got out of there and looked for you. It was several hours later that I found Sai, Sakura and you in a crater. So I took the three of you with me and ran back to Konoha, as I didn't know what was going on and felt that it would be safer to be back home than in the wilderness." Naruto finished while looking at Yamato questioningly. "Why was I alone in that hideout? Did you and the team abandon me there?" he asked with anger freely visible on his face. Yamato, seeing where this conversation was going, quickly replied, "No, we did not abandon you. When I left, I created a clone to keep you safe until you came back to your senses. We needed to follow Orochimaru, as it was the only lead we had to the Uchiha. We couldn't afford to waste such opportunity. Something must have happened to my clone while we were gone. That is the only reason I can find to explain you waking up alone. Sorry if that scared you." Naruto's eyes softened a little at that. "I understand," he finally said slowly. The truth though was that he was laughing in his mind at the ease with which he manipulated Yamato. A little show of anger and distress, and they quickly lose their cool, he thought while Yamato continued his questioning. "You said you found us in a crater, yes?" Naruto nodded. "Did you find anything else?" "We were fighting against Sasuke there, and I am ashamed to admit that he outclassed us easily." "So you understand my surprise, as what you said imply that he left us alive just like that?" Naruto's eyes got big as saucers when he heard Yamato said that. Sasuke beats the three of you? Easily? How is that possible? I know it is surreal, but it is the truth. I don't know what kind of training he endured, but he is that good. We greatly underestimated him and his improving rate for that matter. I don't know if there was anything out there. When I saw you unconscious, the only thing I thought was to get you to safety. I admit I was also afraid that someone would suddenly appear out of nowhere. He finished while scratching his hairs in his embarrassed signature reaction and grinning stupidly. Yamato nodded at that, understanding what Naruto must have went through. So blaming him was the last thing on his mind, instead he was blaming himself for being weak. I have been a ninja longer than the Uchiha, yet he easily outdid me. I can't even use the excuse of not having a bloodline like him with my Mokuton jutsus. The truth is that I became complacent in my ability, thinking I was above others by being an Anbu captain. Seems like I will have to correct that mistake once back home. It was at that moment that Sakura woke up and joined them around the campfire. She looked at Yamato and nodded at him in respect, but when she laid her eyes on Naruto, attention immediately rose in the air. The first thing that came to her mind was to blame Naruto for this and voice her thoughts of him. But that quickly went out of her mind when she saw something she had never seen in Naruto's eyes: contempt. This surprised her. Naruto's look was that of a predator waiting for his prey to make a mistake. In this case she felt that she was the prey and not the other way around. "Evening, Sakura," Naruto said softly to Sakura, who nodded slowly. Yamato found nothing strange about the way Naruto greeted his teammate and chose to go back to his introspection. Because he didn't know them well enough, he couldn't have noticed the subtle change in Naruto's way of greeting Sakura. Sakura did. Tired as she was, she didn't comment on it, as she wasn't in the mood for a verbal fight with Naruto. A fight she wasn't sure she would win with the way Naruto looked back at her, so she did the next best thing and asked Yamato what happened since losing consciousness. Upon being filled in, she couldn't stop the depressing sigh that escaped from her. Like Yamato, she was thinking about the earlier fight and found herself lacking. I couldn't even do something against him. I am labeled back home as a prodigy when it comes to my chakra control, but I couldn't even notice that I had been trapped in a genjutsu. What kind of apprentice to the Hokage get beaten like that? She cringed though when she remembered what Tsunade told her not even a few months ago. Flashback. Tsunade stood in front of her student in her private training ground. She just finished her training session with Sakura, who sat on the ground exhausted. "You are weak," Tsunade said to a shocked Sakura, who looked at her mentor. "Granted that you are well above regular ninjas, you are still too weak to be considered my successor. But Tsunade-sama, I am one of the best in the village when it comes to healing. I followed all your advices to the letter." "How can you say that?" Sakura asked incredulously. "Do you really think that I was chosen as the Godem Hokage only for my healing art? There is a reason my teammates and I were considered a legendary team during the Second Shinobi War, you know. And this had nothing to do with my healing skills. In our team each of us were very powerful in an area. Orochimaru was our ninjutsu and kinjutsu expert. Jiraiya was our seals, information gathering and trap making expert. And finally I was the taijutsu expert." She looked at the wide-eyed Sakura with a smirk. "Surprised, aren't you? People always assume that Jiraiya is the taijutsu expert, but they are wrong. I know many assume that the only thing I have is my super strength and that by being able to dodge it they can beat me easily." She looked pointedly at Sakura. "Even you for that matter." For her defense, Sakura looked ashamed of thinking like that of her sensei. "But I can understand why they think like that. But the truth is that my strength is just the first level of my true technique. The reason why even the current Raikage is wary of fighting me." "Your true technique?" Sakura questioned. "What, did you think that I was that feared back then only because of my strength? These days, no one, except those that fought in the Second Shinobi War, remember why I was so feared like my teammates. That is because I haven't used that particular technique in a long time now." She looked at her student with a cold gaze. "Right now you are not ready to learn that technique and thus be considered my successor. You and Shizune have the same problem. And this is what makes me angry. Few people know this, but there has always been a big rivalry between the Sannin. With Orochimaru and Jiraiya having taken an apprentice, I don't want to be left behind by them. Along the same lines, I won't accept anything less than you being able to fight toes to toes against Sasuke or Naruto, if not outright defeat them." With that said, Tsunade turned her back on Sakura and went away, not before leaving a parting word. When the times comes I will teach you to fight and not to heal. End flashback. At first she had wondered what kind of rivalry her sensei was talking about, but she found nothing indicating this to be the truth. With time she forgot the discussion she had with Tsunade and now she couldn't help but apprehend seeing the look she will be given once she comes back home. After a while though, Yamato looked at Naruto. Now that we are awake, you can rest too. We will take care of the watching. Naruto nodded before he went to his sleeping bag. Even if he hid it well, he was tired from the earlier events and a good night of sleep wouldn't be so bad for him. The next day, we found the team of 4 jumping from trees to trees. Yamato was in the front holding a knocked out Sai in his arm. The latter awakened last night but was knocked out again immediately after. Sakura was in the middle while Naruto closed the formation by standing behind them. Because of the tension of having failed a mission, they didn't talk to each other as they contemplated the consequences of their failure. In Naruto's case though, it was more about thinking of his next course of action regarding the matter of his clan's destruction. Already Yamato was sending him curious glances once in a while. Fortunately he knew why the latter was doing that. Apparently Yamato couldn't sense the Kyuubi's chakra circulating through his system and that worried him. Naruto told him that the ceiling he used to get him back to his senses might be the cause. Thankfully Yamato had never used the technique on a Jinchuriki before so he didn't know what to expect. The real reason was that Naruto had stopped assimilating Kyuubi's dimension as his mind. This had the side effect of reducing the amount of Kyuubi chakra going through him. There was still some but it was so minimal that Yamato couldn't sense it. Naruto knew this but didn't explain it to Yamato. He looked in front of him as he jumped to another tree. Used to this method of transport, he didn't even bother to look at the next tree to know where he needed to go. Right now, what I lack the most is information. It is a shame but I don't even know the geographical position of most of the countries. I should have learned those during my academy years but a combination of several factors made me miss them. So first thing should be to learn everything I missed. He looked as Yamato glanced in his way again but upon seeing Naruto looking at him, he quickly looked back in front of him. I also need to know how the village really works. This will point me in the direction I need to take to learn about my clan. This time his face changed and freely expressed his anger. And finally I need to find out who in Konoha could have put in my mind the barrier that blocked the Kage Bunshin ability. He had a guess that it was a member of the Yamanaka clan as the rumors had it that they were well versed in the kind of techniques that affected the mind, but he couldn't be so sure. After all, it was explained during one of the few classes he didn't miss that the Yamanaka and Nara techniques weren't bloodlines but were easier to use for them. It was possible for someone outside the clan to have learned these techniques so he couldn't blame them without proofs. I will be damned if I become like the villagers. That doesn't mean I won't take my revenge on those guilty though. We are finally there, he heard Yamato said in front of him, so he quickly cooled his features and prepared himself for the confrontation that will soon happen. Tsunade was sitting behind her desk. In front of her stood Yamato, Sakura, Naruto and Sai. The last one was still restrained but unlike before he was awake now. She was specifically looking at Yamato, as he was the leader of the team. I assume by the lack of the target's presence that the mission was a failure. Unfortunately Hokage-sama, things happened during the mission that weren't accounted for. Like what? Tsunade wondered curiously. No wait, I would prefer a complete debrief on the mission from the get-to-go. Yamato nodded at his leader request and began the process of explaining everything that happened since the day they got out of Konoha. He took great care of highlighting everything of importance and whenever there was an event where he wasn't directly present like the fight between Naruto and Orochimaru, he left the concerned take care of it. Meanwhile, Tsunade looked attentively at her ninjas. When she heard about Naruto and Orochimaru fight, she looked pointedly at him. She noticed that the latter was rather calm unlike the boasting ninja she was used to. He is still as emotional as before if he lost his control against Orochimaru's taunting. Granted that Snake is rather good at getting under the skin of his opponents. But upon hearing the way Sakura made herself useless, she frowned deeply and looked right at her student. The look she gave her was enough for the latter to know that she was in trouble. Half an hour later, Yamato had finished recounting everything that happened and was now waiting for his leader's reaction. Tsunade frowned as she looked at Sai before she made a gesture with her hand. Immediately afterward, an Anbu with a rat mask materialized beside her. Rat, I want you to take Sai to Ibiki. Tell him he has free rein to get this young ninja to tell us everything he knows. The Anbu nodded before moving quickly toward a nonplussed Sai and roughly grabbed the latter by the shoulder. Moments later, the two of them had disappeared in a puff of smoke. That Danzo. I should have known that something like that would happen. You give an arm and they take the whole hand, she thought furiously as she contemplated on the way she could use it to her advantage. Tsunade coughed to get back the attention of her ninjas. You said that Orochimaru spared you, or at least you think so? Yamato nodded at that. Curious. I wonder why he would do that, but knowing him, he must have seen something in you that made you more valuable alive than dead. But just to be sure, Sakura and you will have to be searched for anything that Snake could have done to you. She finished looking at Yamato and Sakura, clearly implying that they couldn't be trusted for now. As for you, Naruto, she looked at him with contemplating eyes. You are to rest until your team is free to go. Naruto nodded slowly as he feigned being tired from the mission. This didn't go unnoticed as Tsunade dismissed them. Naruto went toward his apartment while Sakura was led by an Anbu to the hospital. Yamato stayed behind, as he didn't finish his report. Is there something else, Yamato? Indeed, Hokage-sama. I didn't want to mention it in front of the others, especially Naruto, because of its importance. Tsunade crossed her arms under her S and waited for the ninja to continue. As you know, I used your grandfather's technique to subdue Naruto when he lost control. What I didn't mention is that afterward, I couldn't even feel a trace of the beast chakra in Naruto. Yamato explained slowly to his leader, who thought about the possible implications of such things. Is it a side effect of the jutsu? Yamato answered negatively. I am not sure. Being the first time I used it on a Jinchuriki, I don't know if it is the case or not. Will it have negative consequences? Again, none that I can think of. In a few days, the beast chakra will come back, I think. I just thought I should warn you of this development just in case, Hokage-sama. Tsunade sighed at that. You are dismissed then. But, Yamato protested, but he was stopped by a glare from Tsunade. But what? You are telling me that the Kyuubi chakra isn't in Naruto's system and won't be for an undetermined amount of time. You don't know if it is good or bad. In short, you gave me nothing except speculation. What do you want me to do with this information anyway? She looked at him with a glare. I have enough problem to deal with, so I would prefer you don't waste my time with speculation. What I want is fact. If you think there might be a problem with Naruto, then investigate it and comes to me later with proofs of your conclusion. Now I have work to do. Recognizing it as what it was, Yamato bowed before getting out of the room, all the while thinking of keeping an eye on Naruto for the few days to come. Meanwhile, Naruto was absently walking in an alley. He looked around to be sure that no one nearby. Upon confirming that, he put his hands in his favorite hand seal and muttered in his mind, Kage Bunshin no Jutsu. In a poof of smoke several clones appeared. He looked at all of them. All of you, you have until the night to find all the information I missed during my academy years. The clones only nodded at their creator before using the henge to change in random people, from children to adults. Afterward they left toward Konoha Public Library, knowing that it held the information they needed. Naruto looked as they left and was ashamed to admit that he should have done this a lot earlier in his training. Even if he didn't have access to the clone technique, he should have at least done something to improve, but he was too frightened to act on his impulse and assume his real personality. Figuring that he had other matter to attend to, he slowly got out of the alley and went toward an area that he knew very well. An area that was so well guarded that despite his pranking streak, he had never been able to get close to the entrance, let alone infiltrate it. This area was the Konoha Archives. Few people even knew that it existed. It was only a myth either in the village or outside it. Only the most graded ninja knew of its existence, and even then, they weren't allowed inside. The only reason he knew of it was because people always dismissed him as inconsequential. It was by luck that he overheard the Sandaime talk about it with one of the elders. At the time, they had needed something from the place, for what? He didn't know. Supposedly, the place was where every missions, events and records was kept. Most other villages preferred to destroy such things, as if it were to fall in enemy hands it would be disastrous for them. But Konoha used it in a completely different way. With it, they could blackmail powerful people in the event that they needed to do so. For Naruto, this was the perfect place to find information about his dead clan. Information that hadn't been censored before being released to the public. It wasn't long before he reached the area he knew the archives were. In front of him stood a tall building. It looked simple enough that it didn't catch the attention of the onlookers if there was any. The last time he went there, he didn't find anything worthwhile. Of course he didn't enter the building as his instincts warned him against doing that. Now with his experience as a ninja, he concentrated and discreetly looked around in case he was observed, and found nothing. Naruto did a double take at that and scowled. I know that I suck at feeling others, but what the hell? Not even a trace of chakra? He thought while he looked around. He couldn't enter the building because if he was detected, then the guards would reinforce the protection, and when the times came for him to really infiltrate the building, it would be even harder. He resigned himself and backtracked from there. This just means I have to train my sensor ability, he thought as he calmly walked back toward the village. Midway from there, he stopped abruptly. I have nothing to do in the village right now. I should use this time to get other things done. He sighed, knowing that what he needed to do right now wasn't something he looked forward to. Without any indication or hand seals, Naruto disappeared from his last position. The only indication being the deafening sound that was heard as he broke the sound barrier again. Fortunately, no one was around to hear it. Kabuto stirred in his sleep as if he was having a nightmare. And like any nightmare, it ended with the dreamer jumping from his sleeping position. He tried at least, as he soon noticed upon opening his eyes that his hands and feet were bound tightly with metal wire. He immediately assessed his situation by trying to unbind himself, but to no avail. Not deterred, he tried to use one of the basic jutsu taught at the academy to slip through the binding, but as he suspected, it didn't work. The last thing he tried was to use his chakra, but discovered to his horror that he couldn't even feel it. Shit, chakra bindings? He questioned himself with a scowl. If there was one thing that made every ninja angry, was being caught by these kinds of binding. They were the worst as they completely stopped the prisoner from using his chakra as long as the latter was in contact with them. Knowing that escape was impossible. For now, he tried to remember how he came to be in this unfavorable position. But he didn't get far as a crack was heard behind him. Like a snake, he turned his neck to see who it was. Upon seeing the male that approached him, he widened his eyes as he remembered everything that happened. I see you are awake. Good, Naruto said as he walked with measured steps until he stood in front of Kabuto. He was satisfied to see the shock written on his prisoner's face. He saw as Kabuto schooled his features and carefully analyzed his surroundings. After a while, Kabuto's gaze settled on Naruto's. Finished trying to come up with an escape plan? But the interested didn't reply. You don't want to talk, I see. That is fine too. After all, I don't need you to speak, not yet anyway. I will do all the speaking for the both of us. Like a good soldier, Kabuto kept his mouth shut and just looked at his captor. One of the first they learned to resist interrogation was to keep their mouth shut for as long as they could. Despite knowing that no one could resist interrogation indefinitely, he still kept to his training. He also knew that he was lucky to have to face Naruto as the interrogator, knowing that the latter didn't possess the skills to make him talk. He believed that at least. A shudder ran through his spine at that. I am sure you remember our first fight. After all, it was at that time that you made your first attempt at killing me. Naruto continued, not minding whatever Kabuto was doing. He still looked at Kabuto though and was impressed that the latter didn't even flinch at the accusation. During that fight, you couldn't stop yourself from showing off your superiority to me, calling me an idiot, someone that would never amount to anything. Seeing that Kabuto still didn't react, he continued. Of course, you also compared me to Sasuke, the genius, the elite, or whatever you call him this day. Fuckmate wouldn't be far from the truth, I guess. No matter the training he had, Kabuto wasn't able to hide the distaste he felt at hearing the last thing Naruto said about him and Sasuke. He may have questioned morality concerning human beings, but he could say at 100% that he was straight. So implying that he wasn't was a blow to his ego. He knew not if it was the fact that he still underestimated Naruto or something else, but he finally chose to speak. What it is, a new interrogation technique. If so, then it is lame. He commented scathingly. Putting me in a clearing devoid of anything. If you are trying to confuse me in the location, then you failed. Obviously I am somewhere in Konoha, possibly the Forest of Death. Now whoever is in charge sent you to do the talking, hoping to take me off guard? Again, it didn't work. I can at least congratulate you on thoroughly binding me, but it is the only thing you did right. Naruto just looked at Kabuto amused. You think it is a ruse of Konoha? What else would it be? But I digress. I shouldn't have interrupted you. Go ahead and talk to your heart content about our fight. Kabuto finished smiling predatorily. One would wonder if he really was the prisoner or the other way around. Naruto looked at Kabuto contemplatively. He was asking himself if he should tell him that Konoha didn't even know that Naruto had him in his possession. In the end, he chose not to and kept it for a later time. As I was saying before you interrupted me, you talked during our fight, a lot. You mentioned something very interesting about your abilities though. This time, Kabuto was more attentive as he had an idea where this conversation was going. After all, he was the one who made these kinds of remarks, and usually what followed next was he dissecting the person on a table. If I remembers correctly, you said that you could regenerate dead cells, thus healing yourself for as long as you had the chakra needed to do so. You also bragged a lot about the fact that unlike Tsunade's own regenerative technique, yours didn't age the user as you didn't create new cells but brought them back to life instead. Am I correct so far? Kabuto didn't reply much to Naruto's disappointment. Now I won't beat around the bush as I am sure you already guessed what I am after. I want you to teach me that technique. Gone was the smiling Naruto, in his place was a serious ninja who wouldn't hesitate to kill to get what he wanted, and Kabuto knew that as well. But if I give him what he wants, I won't have any use for him left. He thought, but Naruto didn't finish his speech. And before you think of using a bloodline as an excuse, I suggest you rethink your strategy, as I know for a fact that you have no bloodline. Kabuto looked at him curiously, prompting him to reply. How I know this little tidbit of information isn't yours to concern with. I don't need such excuse when I simply know that this isn't something you can learn. Someone with such little knowledge of the medicinal art would never be able to grasp the concept being my jutsu. So you must have understood that it isn't that I don't want to, but I cannot teach you this. He finished with a satisfied smile because of two facts. The first was that he had brought Naruto to a stop all the while questioning his intelligence. The second was that if Naruto really wanted to learn that jutsu, then he would have to keep him alive. This increased his chance of escaping as Naruto was bound to make an error sooner or later. When he looked at Naruto's face though, he couldn't help but feel like he was forgetting something very important, something that would come back to bite him hard. For his part, Naruto was lost in his thoughts as he contemplated what he had to do. On one hand, Kabuto's analysis of the situation was right. If the jutsu involved deep knowledge of the medicinal arts, then he couldn't learn the technique. Or at least the Naruto from before his rebirth. Kabuto didn't know the ability he had access to now, so he couldn't have anticipated that he could acquire knowledge at a fast rate. So he could go ahead with Kabuto's implied tutoring and learn the technique after a while. But that would make him reliant on an enemy, something he didn't want in the least. On the other hand, he could simply take the information he needed by force, but even he had to admit that he was no interrogator. Of course he could senselessly hurt Kabuto until he got what he wanted, but there was no way to say if it would work and how long it would take. That left him with limited options to find a sure way to get information. The first thing that came to his mind was ironically the mind attacks possessed by the Yamanaka clan. If he were to learn them, he could easily invade Kabuto's mind and get what he wanted. His mind made up, he carefully went outside of Kabuto's sight, behind the trees where two teams of Naruto's clones waited. The clones were there to keep an eye on Kabuto for the time being. Naruto replaced them every 12 hours to be sure that they didn't dispel from lack of chakra. The Naruto that led the interrogation nodded at them before he disappeared in a puff of smoke, knowing that the original would get the information or lack of and decide what to do next. A few days later, like always, Tsunade was sitting behind her desk working tiredly on paperwork. You would think that a ninja of her stature wouldn't waste her time doing such menial task. Unfortunately, it was a requirement of the position she held. While she could easily delegate the work to several of her underlings, she would still need to check whatever those subordinates of hers did. After all, most of the paperwork was about day-to-day management of the village. She wouldn't be surprised if someone took advantage of it if they could. Sighing, she looked at the drawers under her desk where she kept her stash of alcohol. What she wouldn't do to get a glass right now. Still as drunk as always. A voice was heard coming from the window on her left. She replied by throwing a handful of papers at the intruder, who easily dodged it. Jiraiya, how many times did I tell you to use the door like a civilized person? I am hurt you compare me with a simple human being. After all, I am not just about anyone. Completely disregarding the deadpan expression on Tsunade, Jiraiya kept at it. From the most known to the most hidden lands of the elemental countries, from mother to daughter, I am known from all as the gallant Toad Sennin Jiraiya. By the end of his introduction, flowers were falling behind him to enhance the display, much to Tsunade's dismay. After much theatrics, Jiraiya finally became serious again as he looked at Tsunade. I heard that Naruto lost control in his last mission. The latter nodded, knowing that it was more of a statement than anything. How bad was it? Tsunade gave him a summary of the mission to answer his question. By the end of it, Jiraiya frowned. He just let them alive? And you let them wander around the village? Tsunade slammed her hand on the table at that. Of course not, they were thoroughly checked for anything suspicious that Snake could have done to them. The result was negative, so I let them go. Jiraiya nodded, ignoring the earlier outburst in favor on piecing together what could have happened in that mission. Finding nothing worthy of note, he decided to explain the real reason of his visit. I have finally found him. Who? The leader of Akatsuki. Jiraiya replied softly to a wide-eyed Tsunade. Then who is it? She snapped at him, impatient on knowing who was behind most of her headaches. Unfortunately, I don't know his identity. I only know that he is in the Hidden Rain village. At that, Tsunade looked suspiciously at her teammate. You plan on confronting him, don't you? But the latter didn't respond. Instead, he just looked outside, gazing at the village. I didn't know you were worried about me, he finally said, smiling, but before he could comment further on it, the door was slammed open by a ninja who seemed to be out of breath. As one person, Jiraiya and Tsunade turned to look at the person that seemed so alarmed. In less than a second, they recognized the person as Yamato, the only survivor of Orochimaru's experiment to obtain the bloodline of the Shodem Hokage. They left him regain his breath, which in itself didn't take that much time. Yamato, having calmed himself, quickly noticed that Tsunade wasn't alone in the office, but upon recognizing the second ninja in the room, he felt much better. Jiraiya-sama, Tsunade-sama, sorry for interrupting you like that, but the situation is dire. This immediately put the two Sanins on guard and expecting the worst. Hokage-sama, like you suggested after our last meeting, I kept an eye on Naruto to see if anything was wrong. Why would you keep an eye on my student? Jiraiya asked dangerously to the Anbu, who seemed to shrink under the intense gaze of the senior ninja. Thankfully, Tsunade was present and quickly made him aware of the side effect of subduing Naruto when he was under the influence of Kyuubi Chakra. After being allowed to continue, Yamato did just that. I have been observing him for a few days now. I was expecting the beast Chakra to come back since then, but it wasn't the case. Earlier I went to his apartment to see if there was any change, but I witnessed something that shocked me. Get over it, boy, Jiraiya snapped. Naruto. He disappeared in a puff of smoke, as if he was a clone. So what? You know that he can use the shadow clone technique, so what is the big deal? That is just it, the whole time it was a clone, because I searched the whole village for him and found nothing. I even went to the barrier squad and asked them if they could feel him in the village, and they said no. I am telling you that for several days Naruto wasn't in the village. Tsunade and Jiraiya widened their eyes as several theories flashed through their minds for an explanation, but before they could think further on it, a blazing alarm sounded through the village, making the two Sanins' faces stricken in horror. They weren't terrified because they could be under attack right now. No, that wasn't something that would scare them like that. What scared them was that particular alarm was only used when the archive had been breached. A few minutes earlier, a figure stood at a treetop. He silently observed his surrounding before looking straight at a lone building that was well hidden by the giant trees that covered the area. If you didn't already know where this building was, you wouldn't be able to find it. Only through extreme luck would you stumble upon it. The figure had spiky yellow hairs held by a black tap. He had bright blue eyes that seemed to dull depending on the amount of light. He wore black pants with a pocket on the right thigh, a black shirt with a black vest above it. To sum it up, he looked like a true ninja that strived in the shadows and only went in the light to kill his next victim. Even if a ninja were to specifically search him by his chakra, he wouldn't be found. That was because during the last few days, Naruto used his clones to train on several specific attributes. One of those was the ability to hide his chakra. Because he had too much chakra, he couldn't use the regular method to hide it. Or at least it didn't work very well with him. Instead, he did something else, something that would be expected from an unpredictable ninja like him. He created his own method of hiding his chakra. It was very efficient, even more so than the regular method, but it wasn't without its flaws. Instead of compressing his chakra in a tight ball around his chest, Naruto left it as it was. He only learned how to change his chakra's signature to simulate that of the nature around him. Because of this, everyone trying to sense his chakra would only sense the energy that could usually be felt in the nature. And even then, few people could sense natural energy, so that reduced the number of people able to sense him drastically. Unfortunately, because he didn't stop his chakra from flowing around him like those who used the compressing method, a possessor of a dojutsu could easily see his chakra flowing. Naruto looked in front of him and muttered to himself, "It is now or never," before he let himself fall forward from the tree. Despite falling to his death, he thought nothing of it. It was only before colliding with another tree that his body vanished without any trace whatsoever. 100 meters away from there, he reappeared in a crouching position on the rooftop. He wisely chose not to use the obvious door that served as the only entry point of the building, as he knew not what was behind it. He could still feel the lingering chakra of the barrier that surrounded the building but paid no mind to it. Exactly like the one surrounding the whole village. Effective but completely useless against me, he thought. Indeed, the barrier was useless against him because it worked by detecting any disturbances on the barrier and the chakra's signature causing the disturbance. If let's says a bird were to go through it, its lack of human chakra's signature would classify it as a harmless intruder. This was done so the ones in charge of monitoring the barrier wouldn't be distracted by animals. This was a weakness that Naruto used, as the way he concealed his chakra classified him as an animal. Without wasting any time, Naruto raised his hand and a Rasengan was formed. He slammed it on the roof, creating a hole large enough for him to get through. He jumped through it and found himself in a room bare of anything. A door was in front of him, but he could already heard people moving through the corridor thanks to his sharpened hearing. Probably alerted by the ruckus I caused, he thought while he quickly searched for a spot to hide. Not long after that, the door was slammed open and kunais sailed through it toward no particular target. Following the flying weapons was a ninja garbed like an anbu. Upon entering the room, he quickly took position in the center of the piece while looking behind the door for anyone that might be hiding there. He found no one. A voice coming from the door said, "Did you find anything?" "No. Whoever caused this must have fled the room before we came here," the ninja inside the room said as he looked at the hole on the far end of the piece. Upon saying that, the second ninja cautiously got inside the piece to confirm what his fellow ninja said. He too looked inside the room and found nothing. He even tried to disrupt his chakra flow in case they were under a genjutsu, but to no avail. He turned to the first ninja to speak when a shadow fell from the ceiling and he felt a hand holding his face and quickly turns it in the other direction, breaking his neck. The second ninja, still analyzing the hole on the ceiling, didn't even notice his fellow ninja death before he choked on his own blood. He had time to look at his torso to see the tip of a kunai protruding from his chest before he fell on the ground. Time seemed to get back to normal as the two bodies fell on the ground at the same time, with Naruto standing in the middle looking disappointed at his victims. They always ignore the ceiling as a potential hiding spot, he thought before moving toward the corridor and closing the door behind him. Knowing that he had few minutes before the others' guards wonder where his last victims are, he quickly and silently moved through the level he was on in search of the stairs leading to the ground floor. He knew that the archives must be enormous, so it was simply impossible to keep them on any of this building's floors. That meant the only place they could be was underground, so he had to go down. It wasn't long before he found the stairs and quickly went down, only stopping at the first floor where he sent 4 clones to take care of those staying at that floor. He didn't want to be boxed from all sides after all, so it was easier to incapacitate everyone in his path. Without opening the door leading to the corridor of the ground floor, he felt 5 ninjas standing all the way. He scowled at that, as that meant at least one ninja would detect him. He could only hope that none of them possessed a device to activate whatever alarms was in place. On the ground floor stood 5 anbu standing at about 5 meters from each others. They were positioned in a way that they would be immediately alerted if one of them was attacked. Of course, they had never been attacked before, as few people even knew this place existed, so they weren't worried that much. But still, orders were orders, so they kept their guard up no matter how boring the task seemed. Unfortunately, nothing could ever prepare them for what happened in just about a few seconds. The ninja standing at the end of the corridor saw everything in slow motion. Without warning, the door leading to the stairs was blown toward them. Fortunately, the closest ninja easily dodged it by jumping above it, but in a blur a shape appeared under him waiting for him to fall on the ground. Not one to disappoint, he fell to the ground, but at the same time he swung his short sword toward the figure, who side-stepped to the left and retaliated with a backhand to the ninja arm and disarmed him. The second ninja, seeing this, moved in a zigzag pattern toward the two fighting. Naruto looked at him and with deadly accuracy, kicked the first ninja toward the second. The two ninjas were slammed on the wall, groaning from the pain. Naruto only had time to look at the other ninjas in the floor to see a cloud of weapons flying at him. Most of them pierced him before he fell on the floor. The Anbu looked closely at Naruto's dead body to confirm his death when it erupted in smoke. Shit, the Anbu swore, as he had to jump backward to dodge an axe kick that slammed on the ground, leaving a dent on it. Before he had time to retaliate, Naruto vanished from his spot and appeared under the ninja. He cut his legs off the ground and with a reverse kick, kicked him toward the ceiling. The fourth ninja had been moving through hand seals for a jutsu when he found himself face to face with Naruto, who appeared above him, and slammed his head on the floor with a backflip. He vanished again and appeared behind the ninja that he sends earlier toward the ceiling. He surrounded his waist with his arms and rotated on himself before slamming the ninja head first on the ground in a perfect mimicry of Lee's lotus attack. The last ninja who saw all this widened his eyes and moved through hand seals for a jutsu that would be impossible to dodge in such narrow corridor. A dragon made of fire erupted from his mouth and charged at the still airborne Naruto. An explosion later and smoke from the impact point. The ninja looked with barely concealed anticipation as the smoke was lifted. But before he could clearly see, a bluish hand made of chakra erupted from it and pierced his belly. He only had time to widen his eyes before he fell on the ground dead. The smoke lifted, Naruto looked around himself and checked that the other ninja were out of it. Finding none of them alive, he moved toward the end of the corridor that the ninjas seemed to protect. There, he found a trap that led underground, but above it was a seal that protected the entry. Thanks to the little lessons he got under Jiraiya tutelage, he was able to determine that it was like the barrier that protected the village. Except this one was a physical one. It seems that it absorbs physical energy and rejects it at the one that produced the energy in the first place. He swore as he finished his analysis. He wasn't a seal master like Jiraiya, so he couldn't create a counter seal for this. Every solution he had in mind would immediately alert everyone in the vicinity of his intrusion. He could live with that, as he had planned to alert Konoha anyway to facilitate his other mission in the village, but he would have preferred to do so in his own terms. Sighing, he went about the process of destroying the seal. No time like the present. He muttered before gathering chakra on his palm and force-feeding it to the seal. This was a method Jiraiya showed him to counter a seal. Unfortunately, it wasn't efficient, as you usually needed a shitload of chakra even for the basic seals, not to mention that by using that much chakra you became a beacon for anyone, thus alerting them of your presence and position. And as if on cue, a blazing alarm sounded through the building, and probably in the village too. Naruto thought with a scowl. Taking into account the time needed to cross the village and reach this spot and the time for Tsunade to put together a team to get here, I have at most 10 minutes before they are here. He thought just as the seal broke under the pressure, giving him access to the trapdoor. Back to the village. Back to Tsunade's office. Things were getting serious as several ninjas, mostly Anbus, were coming to her office. For most of them, they had never heard of this kind of alarm. Usually the alarm was followed by a specific series of distinctive sounds that gave the instructions they were supposed to follow. But this time, they were acting blind, which is why they were going to the Hokage Tower to receive their instructions. Yamato too didn't know what this specific alarm meant and was looking around panicked. At first he looked at the two Sanins for guidance, but quickly found that they were even less useful than him. That was because Jiraiya and Tsunade knew very well what that meant and had every reason to be afraid. The archive is under attack? How is that possible? No one even knows of its existence. That shouldn't be possible at all. Tsunade was thinking, more like denying the possibility of such a thing happening. It had to happen when I am back in the village. Jiraiya thought, a scowl replacing his earlier horror-stricken face. I told Sensei that keeping such thing would come back to bite us later on, but of course he didn't listen to me. Now we are in this situation. If those information fall into the wrong hands, then we are as good as dead, politically speaking. Their introspection over, Tsunade immediately took charge. Cat. A ninja with a cat mask appeared in front of her. I want you to dispatch the Anbu everywhere in the village to protect every sensible spot. The Anbu nodded before disappearing to execute his mission. He knew that the Anbu had to protect places like the Hokage Tower, the hospital, the academy, and several places of interest in case they were under attack. Another Anbu appeared in front of Tsunade. This one had a rat mask and had a slender figure indicating that she was a woman. Gather all the Junins and Chunins and have them cover every exits of the village. I want Konoha on lockdown. No one is allowed to get in or out until the matter is resolved. Having his order, the ninja went away. Another one quickly replaced her. As for you, have the Genins evacuate the civilian to safety and stay with them for added protection. Tsunade finished as the last ninja disappeared, leaving Jiraiya, Yamato and her alone in the office. Jiraiya looked at her with a serious gaze. If the situation wasn't precarious, he would have commended her on her quick thinking. After all, he knew just like her that no protocol was in place to react under this situation. This was done because no one was supposed to know of the existence of the archives. Even now they couldn't send their ninjas toward the area it was situated, as they would ask too many questions afterward. Only those that were in the confidence were allowed to get there. And they are here, it seems. Jiraiya thought as he felt several chakra signatures enter the office in their fighting gear. The first one had long dark brown hair and featureless white eyes. He was wearing the standard uniform of a Konoha Junin and a forehead protector on his forehead. This was none other than Hyuga Hiyashi, the leader of the Hyuga clan. The next one to appear had long red hairs and markings on his cheeks. Unlike Hiyashi, he wore a black suit completed with armor with the kanji for food on it. He also wore a rope belt, handguards and a piece of cloth tied around his head. This was Akamichi Choza, leader of the Akamichi clan. Directly on the left of Choza stood another ninja with dark hairs tied up into a spiky ponytail, dark eyes as well as a goatee. A deerskin coat was over his standard Konoha uniform. This was Nara Shikaku, leader of the Nara clan. The final ninja that appeared had long blonde hairs. He wore the standard uniform with a sleeveless red coat above it. This was Inoichi Yamanaka, leader of the Yamanaka clan. Upon seeing the four ninjas that appeared, Tsunade gave a thin smile. I see you remember protocol. The only reply she got was serious nod from the four of them. I won't enter into any details concerning the situation we are facing, as even myself don't know everything that is going on. I have already dispatched the ninjas all over the village in case the intruders escape. Shikaku interrupted her. Do you have an idea on the identities of the intruders? I have one, but we will talk about it while we move toward the place. She replied before she turned toward Yamato, who was still in the room looking at the happenings. You are coming with us. I have the feeling you will be invaluable soon. Without letting Yamato answer, she turned around and vanished. Jiraiya and the four ninjas that came in the room followed her. Yamato was hard-pressed to follow them, as despite being one of the most powerful Anbu right now, it seemed that each of the clan head were well above his level. While every ninjas in Konoha was going toward their assigned position, a lone ninja was stealthily moving through the shadow of the buildings to reach his target. The person had been assigned a mission by his master and he wasn't about to fail. Before long he reached a compound that belonged to one of the clans of Konoha. Because of the emergency, there were only the minimum guards protecting the compound. Without difficulties, he bypassed the guards, as he made sure they couldn't sense his chakra. Then he moved through the different houses with a particular one in mind. Upon reaching the house, he easily broke in and searched what he wanted. A few minutes later, he found it. It was a big scroll with a clan symbol on it. He knew that the blood of a member of the clan was needed to open it. Fortunately, he acquired it earlier in the day. Satisfied with a successful mission, he quickly exited the room and escaped using another path. He also made sure that he left no trace of ever being there before going. The guards in front of the compound would not know that someone got through them without them knowing. It would be a long time before they noticed the missing scroll, as they didn't use it often. It took 10 minutes for the special team formed by Tsunade to reach the archives location. That was including the time needed for her to give orders to her ninjas. If it wasn't for this they would have been here earlier, but there was nothing they could have done about it. They stopped just in front of the building Naruto entered just minutes before they came here. Yamato looked at the building and found nothing noteworthy about it. Appearances are deceiving, he repeated it to himself and quickly waited for his orders. Tsunade on the other looked at the building in deep thought. If she was right about the identity of the intruder, having Yamato present when they confronted him would be advantageous for them. At the same time, she didn't think that the Anbu was ready to learn what was inside that building. She didn't have to make a decision as the resident strategist of the village took it from here. It would be better for you, Shikaku looked at Tsunade, and Jiraiya to go inside the building, along with Yamato just in case, while we stay outside to stop anyone from escaping. We don't know what the intruders have done to the building. You and Jiraiya are more likely to escape any traps they may have put in place. Hiyashi will stay with us and scan the area with his Byakugan, to warn us of anyone getting in or out of the perimeter. Tsunade just nodded at the plan, as she couldn't find a better one. Jiraiya just nodded absently as he contemplated what he would do if it really was his student down there. He went after Tsunade and Yamato as they entered the building, going directly toward the trapdoor. Upon reaching it, Jiraiya noticed the burn marks around the seal that used to block the passage and a chill went up his spine. He was the one that taught Naruto how to destroy a seal after all. He knew that the latter was brash enough to counter a seal by overloading it with chakra. If it was the work of another village, they would have prepared for such protection and got through this more subtly. The farther they went inside the underground maze, the clearer it was that Naruto was behind this. He could see grinding marks left by what could only be a Rasengan. The three ninjas cringed though when they saw the devastation that was left behind Naruto's wake. Dead ninjas laid on the path. Because of the amount of defeated ninjas, they were beginning to think that Naruto wasn't alone. They simply couldn't conceive that Naruto reached such level that he was able to dispatch a whole garrison of elite ninjas that held the advantage against him, as they knew this place like the back of their hands. But the proof was there. No one seemed to have survived. Before long they reached a huge door that led to the main room. Readying themselves, they pushed open the door and got inside the room, careful not to ignite any traps. But what they saw inside the room wasn't something they expected. Inside the room sat a lone figure on a table. They quickly recognized him as Naruto, not that the latter was doing anything to hide his features. What surprised them was the fact that the shelves were bare. Every scroll had been removed and put somewhere else. They didn't know where but supposed Naruto had a hand in it. Another big surprise was that Naruto seemed to have been waiting for them to come as he sat on the table with his right leg crossed over the left. He looked at them and said slowly, "You took your time to get here, Tsunade, Jiraiya, Yamato." The way he talked increased the bad feeling the three had, but they were ninja for a reason. Tsunade, quick to anger, was the first to speak while Jiraiya and Yamato chose to observe. "Naruto," she yelled, "I am not that far, you know. You don't need to yell at me." Naruto answered, looking at her dead in the eyes. Not perturbed in the least, Tsunade spoke again. "What is the meaning of this? Have you finally lost your mind? You attacked and killed several members of the Konoha forces. Then you infiltrate a protected area?" Naruto took his time to reply to these questions. "For your last question, there was no sign that said it was banned from entering this building, so you will excuse me if I didn't particularly feel the need to ask for permission." Tsunade gnashed her teeth at that, wanting nothing more than to smash the brat mouth. "Concerning the killing of the Konoha forces, they shouldn't have attacked me in the first place. I could even claim self-defense for that one. How was I supposed to know that they weren't enemy disguised in Konoha ninjas sent to capture me in an unknown area of the village?" They couldn't fault the logic of the kid, and if it weren't for the change in personality and the earlier suspicion toward him, they would have been inclined to believe his story, but as it was, they knew that it was load of crap. "Do you really think we will believe such story?" Tsunade asked incredulously. "Not really, but I wanted to try it anyway. No loss on my side." Naruto nonchalantly added to a fuming Tsunade. "But enough with the jokes, I am sure you have a busy schedule to follow just like me, so I will get to the point." Naruto rose from the table and observed amusedly as the bodies of the Konoha ninjas tensed. What happened to the Uzumaki family? To Yamato, the question was an easy one and he found nothing suspicious about it, while the two Sanins immediately tensed at that. The reaction wasn't lost on Naruto's part and it reinforced the impression he got about the two of them. "Mind you, I am not asking for the cover story that is recorded in the public library for anyone to see. I want the truth," he added. Tsunade briefly looked at Jiraiya for guidance before she looked back at Naruto with anger clear in her eyes. "Are you telling me that you infiltrated this place just to learn this? Did it ever occur to you that you could simply have asked us? Do you think I would ask you something like that after discovering that someone, probably a Konoha ninja, had tampered with my mind to stop me from learning the full ability of the shadow clone technique?" Naruto shot back, shocking the Sannin, from the knowledge that his mind had been tampered with or that he now knew the secret of the shadow clone technique, only they knew. "I knew this place existed since a long time, but I never saw the need to get inside the building. Recently though, I learned that several things had been hidden from me by this village. The very village I was ready to lay my life for. If you think that I won't do everything I can to get what I want, then you are sorely mistaken. This village owes me and I intend to collect it." Naruto continued with venom in his voice. They could see a vindictive satisfaction in his eyes, but they couldn't determine where it comes from. Jiraiya, wanting to defuse the situation and save his student from Tsunade, opened his mouth to speak, but his teammate beat him to the punch. "Jiraiya, I don't want any of your excuse right now. I don't care if he is your apprentice, but he has gone too far this time. He will have to answer to the council for this. This time I won't protect him from them." Jiraiya just dropped his head, as he knew that Tsunade was right. She had already done so much for the kid even though he didn't know it, but this time he knew that the boy had gone too far. They wouldn't be able to protect him from the council, especially not from them. If only he had told him about his family earlier. Naruto saw Jiraiya's reaction but thought nothing of it. He didn't know what they were talking about and frankly he didn't care. He wanted the truth. He wanted to know what happened to his family and why it was hidden from him in the first place. Nothing would stop him from discovering that. "You should have fled from here while you still could," Tsunade said as she cracked her knuckles. "Why should I? Because you would have stood a chance at escaping. At least for a little while until the hunter nins would have caught with you," she said as she made a coded signal for Yamato for him to get ready. She looked at Jiraiya and knew that he wouldn't be of use to them, as he didn't seem to want to fight his own student. She could understand that, but fortunately Naruto wasn't her student. She considered him like a little brother sometimes, but he would never replace Nawaki, and that was the end of it. "You seem awfully confident in your capacity to subdue me if not kill me. I cannot say I am surprised. After all, this village has always underestimated me," Naruto said as he crossed his arms in front of his chest, not even preparing for an attack from his enemy. Tsunade scowled at that. "I have the right to be confident, Gaki, unlike you." Without warning, she charged at Naruto and punched him in the face. Or at least tried, as the latter ducked under the punch and retaliated with his own. It was easily blocked by Tsunade, who caught it in a firm grip and launched him toward one of the shelves. Before he collided with it, he regained his balance and softly landed on it, looking down at the Konoha ninjas. Tsunade's scowl deepened, surprised by Naruto's recovery. She smirked though when a tree broke through the shelves and forced Naruto to jump toward her. She immediately prepared herself to punch Naruto, but she could only widen her eyes as the latter vanished too fast for her to follow. What she did felt was the pain that erupted on her belly. She was violently launched to a set of shelves with the chakra from the Rasengan surrounding her body. Jiraiya could only look in shock at what he had witnessed, while Yamato, true to his position as an Anbu captain, kept attacking Naruto with plants. Before the wood could reach him though, a hand made of chakra was formed behind Naruto and went through the wood, completely destroying it in the first place. Yamato only had time to dive to the side as the hand passed by the position he once stood at. But the hand didn't stop there as it turned around and charged at the still-downed Yamato, who could only look in fright at the mass of chakra. An explosion occurred where he stood. Smoke rose from the ground and concealed him. When the smoke was lifted though, Naruto scowled at what he saw. Standing between the hand and Yamato was Tsunade, with her right hand impacting with the chakra arm. Slowly, the arm dissolved as he stopped sustaining it with his chakra and saw Tsunade look at him with a serious gaze, something he only saw when she fought against Orochimaru 3 years ago. "Yamato, go beside Jiraiya. It seems that your talent won't be needed in this fight after all," Tsunade said coldly, all the while keeping an eye on Naruto in case he tried anything. Yamato did as he was ordered. He wasn't willing to get involved in what seemed to be a battle way out of his league. Once her subordinate was away from what had become an arena, Tsunade focused entirely on her opponent. She never would have thought that the brat would progress this much. From Jiraiya's reactions she could tell that the techniques he used weren't something taught to him by her teammate, and that worried her greatly. If Jiraiya didn't know them, then Naruto had been able to fool a Sannin for a long time, and that wasn't something that could be done so easily without tremendous skills. She was now reviewing everything she knew about Naruto but couldn't find how it was possible. "Are you wondering how I am this strong?" Naruto asked, not really expecting an answer. Tsunade just scowled at him. "I am at a disadvantage right now. Because of this enclosed area, I can't do too much damage to the ground and wall unless I want to bury us all. That means I have to be careful with my super strength. Also, whatever speed technique he used is very dangerous. I didn't see it enough to create a counter for it, and he is using it sparingly. Maybe so I won't understand how it works," she thought, analyzing the situation she was in. "Be grateful, brat. You will get to witness something that few in this world have," she said while closing her eyes in concentration. She knew that Naruto would be curious enough to let her finish charging her technique even though it was stupid. And like she thought, Naruto looked curiously at the technique and waited until it was ready. On the sidelines, Jiraiya widened his eyes at that. Is she really going to use it against Naruto? Does she think he is really that much of a threat to use something as deadly as that? He wondered. He knew that technique was something even more dangerous than her super strength. Something that he didn't want to face even with his Sage mode activated. Before long, Tsunade's body was shining from a bright light coming from her body. She opened her eyes and looked at Naruto with a smirk on her face. "You shouldn't have let me finish this technique. Now it is over." Upon saying this, she vanished at about the same speed Naruto used earlier. It was close to the sound speed, and that shocked Naruto greatly. Fortunately, he was able to dodge the initial strike, or so he thought, as Tsunade changed the direction of her arm at the last moment and slammed her hand on his face. He was slammed on the ground and rolled for several meters before stopping on the wall at the far end of the room. Tsunade was upon him in an instant, and with a series of punches and kicks, she lifted him off the ground. Naruto could only see darkness around himself, as Tsunade pummeled him. In a desperate attempt, Chakra erupted from his body, causing an explosion. Tsunade was forced to get back, giving him time to recover as much as he could, but the damage was already done. When Tsunade looked at him once the smoke was lifted, she saw that Naruto had trouble standing on his feet. Blood was freely rolling from his mouth. But what satisfied her more was the pure hate that radiated from his eyes. "Finally, I am getting a reaction from you," she thought. She had been getting frustrated with the dull face Naruto showed them. Naruto looked at her, and if look could kill, Tsunade would dead several times over. He was hurt very badly because he didn't have the regeneration granted to him by Kyuubi anymore. He was sure that if it had gone for longer, he would have died. She must be thinking that the Kyuubi will heal whatever damage I receive, that is why she isn't holding back. Even now that beast is ruining my life, he thought with a scowl. Not one to be outdone, he immediately activated his speed technique and vanished in a sonic boom, shocking those present, especially Jiraiya, who was reminded of his late student. "How?" Jiraiya muttered in a mixed feeling of pride and shock. Tsunade, on the other hand, stayed calm. Of course she was surprised that the brat was even faster than before, but she had a surprise for him in reserve. And just like she thought, she felt a ball of chakra touch her back. In a reaction time that would render even the Yondaime Raikage green with envy, she rotated on herself and kicked the offending arm to the side. Before Naruto could retaliate, another punch was slammed on his belly. In a puff of smoke, Naruto was replaced with a log was destroyed from the impact. He reappeared on another shelf in the room, looking down at Tsunade with a calculative look. Tsunade, confident as ever, looked at him with a smirk. "You see just how hopeless it is, don't you? You may be faster than me, but it doesn't matter in the end. You may have escaped this time by luck, but you will eventually get caught. Do you really think it was luck that made me switch with a log on time?" Naruto asked coldly. Gon was joking Naruto, this time he was really getting into it. "Despite the techniques I showed you, you still underestimate me. Then let me make you reconsider." Suddenly 3 chakra arms formed around Naruto, with one of them a little above his head. "When I made my chakra explode around me, I noticed something that was far more dangerous than the improvement in speed that you displayed. I am sure you showed me that speed improvement on purpose to hide the true nature of your technique. Yamato looked in wonder while Jiraiya clenched his fists. He noticed it so fast? Once the chakra touched your skin, you quickly moved outside the range of the blast. I wasn't sure at first, so I tried to confirm it by attacking you with something that you couldn't see. And just as I thought, your body immediately reacted once I touched you. What the technique really does is increase your reaction time to a godly level. The speed improvement is only a side effect of this. Am I right? Naruto finished to a stunned Tsunade, who couldn't understand how Naruto, a ninja with the attention span of an insect, could have analyzed her technique so easily. But Naruto wasn't finished. You really did a number on me, and like I said earlier, I have a schedule to follow. So you will have to excuse me. You really think that I will let you escape now that you are boxed in? What do you intend to do? You may have pierced my technique, but that doesn't mean you can counter it. Tsunade said smugly. Naruto just looked impassively at her, and suddenly chakra begins to pour toward the chakra arm that was above his head, forming a Rasengan of epic proportion. The concentration of chakra on that attack will destroy everything around here. Does he want to bury us all here? Yamato thought in fright at the jutsu. I wonder, can you escape a blast that will cover this whole building? Naruto asked with a coldness that froze the Konoha ninja. Just outside the building, Hiashi, Shikaku, Choza and Inoichi had been monitoring the surrounding when they felt a huge discharge of chakra, before a violent explosion was heard. The explosion was so huge that the shockwave sent them flying toward the trees, knocking them down. The smoke that was lifted could be seen from the village as it went so high into the sky. A few minutes later, enough smoke was lifted to allow those present to see around them. What they saw was the huge crater that was formed where the building once stood. At the edge of the crater, Naruto stood, surrounded by chakra arms. In the middle of the crater, a huge toad and a slug stood. After a while, the two animals opened their mouth to let Tsunade, Jiraiya and Yamato out. They only had time to see Naruto look at them with the same hate that he displayed earlier and vanish like he was never there in the first place. They still heard his parting words though. I am sure that I will find my answer in those archives. But should Konoha has been involved in the destruction of my clan, mark my words, I will hunt you down to the last one. It is said that there is no smoke without fire. What was happening to Konoha at that moment didn't escape that rule. Of course there was no fire in the village, literally speaking, only the smoke that was raised as the aftermath of Naruto's attack. In this case, the fire was of a totally different nature. An hour had gone by since the start of the alarm and the village was still in lockdown. Most ninjas were panicked, not because the situation was dire, like an invasion for example, but because they knew not what was going on. They say that ignorance is bliss, but not in this case. This time it was worse than anything Konoha ninjas ever experienced. Fortunately, the shrilling sound of the alarm came to an end. At the archive location, Tsunade, Jiraiya, Yamato and the clan heads that came, were assessing the damage done. They had been going over the crater that now replaced the building, trying to salvage anything, but it was all for nothing. Whatever attack was used had destroyed pretty much everything, or at least rendered it useless. It will take a long time for anything to be able to grow again in this soil. A voice was heard beside Tsunade, who looked pensive. Do you think it is the time to care about such thing? She snapped, not really in the mood. Yamato wisely shut his mouth and kept digging like the others. After a while, they stopped and gathered at the edge of the newly formed crater. Shikaku was looking grim as he was already assessing the consequences of the event, same with the others, except Jiraiya, who was still lost in his mind trying to understand what went wrong. What do you make of this? Tsunade asked her subordinates. It is like you said. Everything is lost. There is no trace of burned papers, only scraps of wood that belonged to the wooden material in the archives. Either the attack disintegrated everything or the scrolls were already taken. Inoichi said. That means he has them. He has all the scrolls that were stored in this place. Choza said gruffly, finishing his teammate's sentence. How the hell did that brat stole every damn scrolls that was in there? It would take an hour at least for several ninjas to get them all. Tension was high in the air as they still couldn't wrap their minds around the fact that a genin, a ninja they had all dismissed when it came to cunning, had been able to successfully infiltrate one of the most guarded places in the village. It was a slap in their face, to their ego, to have been so easily played for fools. Shikaku sighed while lighting a cigarette. It is obvious that he used the clone technique to get this done faster than expected. When we designed the protocol to follow in case something like this happened, we counted on the Anbus guarding the place to slow down the attackers for at least half an hour. Add to that the time they would need to break through the seal and shift through the information to get what they want. We calculated that we had a margin of an hour to react. He paused to check that everyone understood what he was saying. The fact that Naruto of all people was able to do the above mentioned in less than 15 minutes is rightfully shocking. Even you, he looked at Tsunade, wouldn't have been able to do the same. To sum it up, we were completely unprepared to deal with this situation. Tsunade said nothing as she looked at the crater. Despite everything being destroyed, bodies of dead ninjas were still present. To think that he would go so far as to kill his fellow ninjas just to know the truth. I shuddered to think of his reaction when he does learn it. She looked back at the group of ninjas, specifically Yamato. Contact every members of the council immediately for a meeting in an hour, not a second later. If they ask what this is about, tell them that it is a matter of national security. Yamato nodded quickly before running back to the village. Now that Yamato is gone, what are your real opinions? Shikaku, now free to speak as Yamato wasn't present to listen on things he had no clearance to know, looked at Tsunade dead in the eye. All traces of laziness absent. He is smart. What do you mean? Don't any of you see it? He went all the trouble of stealing everything that was inside the archives. He knew that after what he did, he would be hunted down by our ninjas. He could have been long gone by the time we came, but he stayed. He could even have played the innocent card, as no one would suspect him of anything unless they had solid evidences. He did none of that. Why? Because by having in his possession what could be termed as the black book of the village, we cannot attack him if we don't want to risk him giving it to an enemy. He wanted us to know that he had it. The others looked at Shikaku not really surprised. As always, he was able to see what no one noticed. It wasn't for nothing that he was the lead strategist of the village. Tsunade though wasn't so sure of that. Yes, we won't be able to directly hunt him down, but that doesn't mean other groups will do the same. You mean? Inoichi muttered, not finishing his sentence, as if there was someone currently listening on them. Yes. They won't let it go once they learn just who was behind the attack. Even I cannot stop them anymore, she said darkly as she looked toward the village. Surprisingly enough, even Jiraiya, who had been idly listening their talk, winced when she said that. For the moment though, what should we tell the council? I don't want to create a panic right now, and if we tell them the truth, it won't end well. She finally asked, only enough to satisfy them. No one knows what happened here anyway. Jiraiya finally spoke for the first time. The group looked at him now, waiting for him to elaborate. Look at it this way, we cannot openly hunt down Naruto, and it would be in our best interest if no one outside of Konoha know that we are missing our Jinchuriki anyway. If you tell them that it was Naruto who did this, then they will demand of you to send ninjas after him. If they know nothing about it, then we can simply come up with a cover story to placate them. Jiraiya explained himself as the others listened attentively. So what you are saying is that we let your student get away with this? Tsunade asked venomously, her ego still bruised by the fact that Naruto escaped her. I never said that. Jiraiya placated her and looked at her with a serious gaze that was very rare for him. Do you have a better alternative? When no one spoke, he continued. I am not telling you to forget what Naruto did, only that we cannot let it be no for now. And like you said, they won't pass such opportunity to get rid of the last Uzumaki. Why not let them do the dirty work for once instead of using our force to do so? Seeing as they didn't outright reject his suggestion, Jiraiya took that as a good sign and turned his back to them. By the way, I am going. I don't have any businesses left in the village. I will get to the mission I was supposed to be at. Before moving though, he threw one last look at Tsunade. For the both of them, it was like time stopped as they looked at each other. Both of them had a bad feeling, as if something bad was going to happen to one of them. But they shook it off as their paranoid nature. After Jiraiya disappeared in a swirl of leaves, Tsunade looked at the remaining ninjas. Let's go back to the village. We have a meeting to attend to. Moving as one, they left the area, heading toward the council meeting room. They made a mental note to come back here and clean the place. An hour had gone by and the members of the council were gathered for an emergency meeting. The room they were in was neither too large nor too small. It contained enough room to accommodate everyone while leaving enough space to move easily. It was designed like an arena with 4 groups of seats, each one reserved to a specific group of the governing body. The first group served as the sitting area of the members of the civilian part of the council. Among them were the heads of the merchant and farming guild, the economic guild, and several others. The second group of seats was the sitting place of the ninja council. Among them were the heads of every ninja clan currently residing in the village. The heads of the Yamanaka, Akamichi, Nara, Hyuga, Sarutobi, Aburame, and several minor clans composed this part of the council. The third group gathered the heads of every ninja department like the torture and interrogation department headed by Morino Ibiki, the Anbu, the information gathering, and the health departments. And finally, in front of the first 3 groups were the seats of the Hokage and the village elders Homura, Kaharu, and Danzo. With everyone present, they could now begin the meeting. The tension was high in the room, as no one really knew what transpired earlier on, as they had not been briefed yet. Now that everyone is here, let me open this meeting by saying that we are as of now out of the emergency state. Tsunade's voice boomed in the room, interrupting everyone and getting their attention. I suppose most of you are wondering about the cause of this emergency and why they have never heard of this kind of alarm. She looked at the audience and saw their wondering faces, confirming her suspicion. First, let me begin by a short history lesson. She took a deep breath to prepare for the following long speech. Long before the ninja villages were created, ninjas lived in clans. They lived off the money they made from the missions given to them. Because of the kind of missions they took, assassinations, sabotage, and the likes, they had to put in place safety measures in case the employer stabbed them in the back. Usually it was the contract signed by both parties that was used as evidence. This way, should the employer try to betray them, they could simply threaten to release the information contained in those contracts, thereby incriminating him too. Everyone nodded at what was said, understanding the logic in using such protection, especially in a cutthroat world like the elemental countries. The Senju clan was no different. They kept a tight record of every missions and events that affected them. That is why at the creation of Konoha, an underground facility was built to keep track of this information, no matter how useless it seemed. In that place was stored the missions Konoha partake in from his construction to this day. This place was named the Archives. At this point almost everyone present was gaping like fish, as they never could have guessed the existence of such place. They had so many questions they wanted answered and were about to shout them, but a look from Tsunade silenced them immediately, wisely deciding to leave the questions for later. As you can imagine, keeping these records came as a double-edged sword. If the information stored there were to fall into the wrong hands, then it wouldn't only be disastrous to Konoha, but to our client too. That is why an entire division of Anbus was assigned to defend the place, and a protocol was put in place in case someone tried to reach it. The alarm you heard earlier was one that alerted the person in the know that the archives were under attack. Tsunade finished looking expectantly at her audience, knowing that they had all kind of questions to ask her, and she wasn't disappointed. Who knew about the existence of that facility? One of the civilian members of the council asked with narrowed eyes. If he had correctly guessed, then few people knew of its existence. Being one of the highest governing members of the village, he was angry that he wasn't privy to such thing. He wasn't the only one though, and Tsunade knew it as she could see the anger clearly visible on their faces. She could either tell them the truth and possibly alienate the 4 clan heads that knew the truth, which wasn't a good thing with the trouble they were currently facing, or lie to them. The decision was an easy one to make. Only the Hokage and the Anbu division in charge of protecting the archives were in the know. We couldn't afford to have too many people knowing the existence of this place. It would greatly increase the risks, so the Shoden decided to keep it to himself and the ones that needed to know. The answer was met with outraged responses, as most of those present were grumbling and muttering among themselves. Clearly the Hokages didn't trust them with this secret, and that bruised their ego more than anything. Are you implying that this governing body cannot keep a secret? The head of the health department angrily asked while standing up from his chair. A snort escaped Ibiki's mouth as he heard it, which made everyone look at him. You mean like this body kept the identity of the Kyuubi Jinchuriki secret? This wasn't the same, another civilian yelled. The people had the right to know who they were dealing with. You can't force us to like that, duh. I mean that boy like you seem to if we don't want to. Ibiki just looked at the civilian, easily conveying how little respect he had for the man. Don't get me wrong, I reserve the right to have my own opinion on someone, but that doesn't mean I mix my personal feelings with my work, unlike some of you." A good part of the audience glared at him, as they knew they were all targeted by the comment Ibiki made. Seeing where this was going on, Tsunade slammed her hand on the table, for once not breaking it but loud enough to gain the attention of the whole room. "We are not here to discuss the matter of Naruto Uzumaki, or did you forget what happened not even a few hours ago?" The shout reverberated through the room, and a few of the council members felt ashamed of letting their personal feelings control them when they had faced impending doom not long ago. Homura, who had been silently observing since the beginning, finally opened his mouth to speak, looking at Tsunade. "You told us what the alarms meant, but you never said what happened." Reminding everyone to focus on the matter at hand, Tsunade nodded as she explained what had happened earlier. "Upon hearing the alarm and knowing what it meant, Jiraiya and I went to the archives to investigate. Unfortunately, we came too late, as every Anbu had already been killed." Despite the gasp of shock expressed by the audience, she kept going. The whole building and underground facility was littered with dead bodies. There were traces left behind that gave us an idea of the person behind the attack. And surely enough, when we came to the main room containing the scrolls, we found him patiently waiting for us. The room was anxiously waiting for the name of the culprit, as none could draw a breath. Uzumaki Naruto was the one behind the attack. As expected, the whole room exploded in angry yells that could rival a shrilling sound. None were happy to hear this, to hear that someone they had tried to keep under their thumbs his whole life would dare revolt against them. For the civilian, it was the proof they needed to bury their shinobi counterpart, as the latter body had always preferred to keep the Jinchuriki alive. Tsunade looked at all of them and wondered if she had done the right thing. She had contemplated lying to the council, giving them a cover story that would satisfy them, but after careful analysis, she came to the conclusion that it was too risky. She had no idea what her other opponents knew of the events. It was possible they would capitalize on the cover story to discredit her, and that was something she couldn't deal with right now. So she chose the alternative solution: reveal everything. "I suppose the boy is in your custody then, if the emergency was cancelled?" Danzo asked Tsunade, who looked at him silently. The question also had the effect of shutting everyone. "No," was the simple reply he got, making him narrow his eyes. Wanting to avoid further shouts, Tsunade clarified the situation. "It seems we have underestimated the boy quite thoroughly. He was able to go toes to toes with me despite using my full power." She ignored the shocked looks of those that knew what she was really capable of. Seeing that we were in a stalemate, he used a jutsu to destroy the whole facility before escaping. The smoke most of you saw was the result of this. Having seen the after effects of the supposed technique that destroyed the archives, most of the ninjas present now saw Naruto in a new light. Because being able to do what their leader had said he did was nothing to sneeze at, quite a few were certain they couldn't do the same after all. While everyone was contemplating what Tsunade said, Danzo had a smirk on his face. This is an unexpected turn of event. It could very well turn out to be a blessing in disguise. Tsunade didn't miss the smirk and narrowed her eyes. "Then I suppose we will have to send Hunter Nins after him to be brought back, dead or alive." The audience turned to look at Homura in surprise. "I may have never wanted him to be killed, but now he has become a threat to Konoha, and that is how we deal with traitor." He finished, letting everyone know his views on the matter. Many were surprised because he was among those that refused to execute Naruto when it was proposed several times, always reminding them of the value of having a Jinchuriki in a village. But it seemed that even he had a limit to how much he could condone. That cannot be feasible. Was she not as experienced? Tsunade would have caved under the numerous glares sent her way. But she just took it in stride. "While I am all for sending Hunter Nins, it would mean prompting Naruto to release the information contained in the archives to the public." The shinobi in the room were all struck with horrors, having understood what Tsunade was implying, leaving the civilian to wonder what was going on. "Oh, I must have forgotten to tell you. Naruto is now in possession of every scrolls that was in the archives," she wanly stated. Now the village had a good reason to be worried, as the person they despised the most literally held their future in the palm of his hands and they could do nothing about it. With Naruto, while Konoha was assessing the damage done and planning a retaliation, Naruto was quickly fleeing toward a safe spot. It wasn't really a safe spot, more like a place where no one went. Then again, it would be difficult for anyone to reach that area. After all, it was at the top of one of the farthest mountains surrounding Konoha. He had decided to go there first as he knew the first place Konoha hunter nins would be looking for were the ruins of Whirlpool's country. He wasn't afraid to confront them, not in the least, but he had more important thing to do first. For anyone looking at him right now, they would only see a blur, and that was only for the ninjas with the most advanced eyesight. Naruto jumped from trees to trees with one purpose in mind: reach that place as quickly as possible. He looked in front of him and spotted someone standing in the middle of his path. Quickly identifying the person, he came to a stop just in front of him. The person was about the same height as him and wore a coat with a hood covering most of his face. "How did it go?" Naruto asked the stranger. "As planned. I have the scroll you asked for," the stranger replied before removing his hood, showing a perfect copy of Naruto's face. He frowned though when he saw Naruto wince in pain. "What happened?" he asked, plainly looking at the blood on Naruto's clothes. "Tsunade happened." The clone would have laughed if the situation wasn't so troublesome. "You were able to travel with these wounds?" he asked again while handing the scroll to Naruto, who took it and fastened it around his waist despite the difficulty he encountered in doing so. "It is not as if I have a choice. My confrontation with Tsunade didn't go as planned. I can see that." Naruto glared at his counterpart for the cheeky remark but continued nonetheless. "Most of my internal organs are damaged right now. The only reason I am still able to move is because I am constantly channeling chakra through my body to lessen the pain." The clone nodded. "This change our plans then. We cannot do anything until these wounds are healed. What are you going to do?" "This is just a minor setback. I can deal with the pain just fine for now. I will just have to obtain the information from Kabuto's mind quicker than planned." Speaking of which, did the clones take him there already? "Yes. They already are at the top of the mountain. Anyway, my job is done. Do you need anything else from me?" Naruto thought for a moment before nodding slowly. "Yeah, I want you to erase our tracks in case I left any clues of where I am going. Also, if you can, try to divert them from our real direction." The clone nodded before retracing the path Naruto took while erasing anything that could indicate the current direction Naruto had taken. After seeing his clone disappear in the horizon, Naruto took another look at the scroll and smiled after seeing the symbol of the Yamanaka clan on it, before he looked in front of him and vanished in a burst of speed. A few hours or so later, Naruto finally reached the top of the mountain that would serve as a safe spot for him for the next few weeks. He looked around himself and smiled as before him was a vast plain that would be useful for his training purpose. He could feel the chakra of his clones far away from the spot he was in, which was a good thing, as he didn't want Kabuto to witness his training. Speaking of which, I am still not able to sense his chakra from here. The only reason I was able to sense his position was because he is with my clones. I will have to find a way to rectify this soon. I can't afford to be taken off guard again," he thought while remembering how Sasuke was able to injure him. Forgetting about it for now, he sat on the ground with a little difficulty. "Because of the injuries, I cannot train in anything involving physical activity. I will concentrate on learning everything I can on mind attacks then." He sighed as he slowly opened the Yamanaka scroll and took his time reading it. ****** For whoever is reading this scroll, I must warn you that what you will read isn't to be taken lightly, because most of the techniques described in this can kill you if they are incorrectly used. First of all, you must understand that mind attacks don't revolve around interrogation technique. Everything that affects the mind or makes use of it outside the body is considered a mind attack. Because of this type of attack is governed by one principle, the mindscape. To attack someone mentally is to enforce upon your target your view of the world or simply you mindscape. Naruto attentively read the scroll as it described that the mindscape was a representation of one's mind. It was a world created by the owner where he is a god as he can do whatever he wants to the place. It also explained that the mindscape was the closest thing to the soul, and as a representation of the owner's mind, it rendered possible the access to information like memories of the owner. Finally, after hours of non-stop reading, Naruto reached the part that interested him the most. To learn how to view someone's memories, you have to follow all of these steps. Reach your mindscape. Project your mindscape to the outside world. Move your mindscape to your target. Take control of your target's mindscape or retrieve the information you need before you are detected or kicked out. ****. Naruto widened his eyes at that, as he would never have guessed that the Yamanaka's techniques were that complicated. Nonetheless, he resolved himself to master them, as he was desperately in need of them right now. He knew no medical ninjutsu and thus couldn't heal himself. He had no choice but to forcibly acquire Kabuto's regeneration technique, as the latter would never heal him if asked. It was too much of an opportunity to get the upper hand for Kabuto to ignore. At best, Naruto would be forced to free Kabuto and hope that the latter healed him, as unlike Kabuto, he needed the bastard alive to gain what he wanted. He looked back at the scroll and looked at the training exercises described to master each of the steps required. The first step demanded of him to master his mindscape, and to do so, there was several meditation and visualization exercises described. Fortunately, he could already reach his mindscape thanks to being a Jinchuriki, so he didn't think it would be too difficult for him. The second step was about being able to project his mindscape to the outside world. This is where it became tricky. Apparently, the Yamanaka were natural at this, and it was because of this that they were so proficient in doing that. This was the most difficult part, as several ninjas gave up on this step. The last two steps involved moving the mindscape outside the body and corrupting the target's own until you were in control of his mind. With the information needed, he used a cross-hand seal and gathered a huge amount of chakra. So much that it was visible to the naked eye. Then he muttered, "Kage Bunshin no Jutsu." The clearing was immediately filled with smoke, signaling the creation of clones. Once the smoke was lifted, so many clones surrounded Naruto that he couldn't even keep track of. He guessed that they were about 500 or so. Fortunately, they already knew what they were summoned for, and quickly sat on the ground in meditation posture. Naruto nodded to himself as he slowly moved away and let his clones train. He was feeling so tired that the only thing in his mind was to take a nap. A few days had passed since the attack dealt to Konoha. Naruto was standing in the same clearing he trained for the past few days. Surrounding him were several scrolls that were placed in no order whatsoever. He was attempting to sort them in a chronological order, as it would make more sense to him that way. Each scroll detailed a mission or an event that took place in the past and affected Konoha or its interests. He had been at it for over 2 days now. When he took the scrolls from the archives, he didn't have the time to sort them, so he just made a huge stack before sealing everything in a scroll. At this time, everything going from the creation of Konoha to the Second Shinobi World War was sorted. That was almost half the archives. It could have been faster if he used clones for help, but he chose not to and instead used them for his needed training. He looked to his left, about 100 meters or so away, and saw to his amusement several teams of clones trying to manipulate their mindscape outside their bodies. Suffice to say that he was very pleased with their improvement. He had mastered his mindscape very quickly thanks to the meditation exercises he used. This also had the side effect of making him more aware of his chakra in general. It increased his control over his chakra and his understanding of the energy itself, but nothing major. When it came to project his mindscape to the outside world, he quickly learned that it was solely based on his will, something he had in spades. He quickly discovered that doing so made him create an ethereal shape for his mindscape. Most users, according to the Yamanaka scroll, shape the projected mindscape as a copy of their body, as it was more natural to do so. For him though, he demonstrated just how unpredictable he was and instead shaped his mindscape as a formless mist. This had the advantage of not limiting himself to the rational thinking of the human mind. It had been difficult, but nothing he couldn't manage. The results had far outweighed the difficulties though, as unlike what Ino demonstrated, he could move his mindscape in every direction instead of a straightforward line. He could have began his training on corrupting the target mind then and there, but if there was something that he didn't like, it was to leave something unachieved. He wanted to master everything there was to know about mind attacks. He couldn't afford not to, as there were people out there that would try everything they could to learn his secrets and why he had an infinite supply of chakra in the hope of replicating it. Sighing, he went back to the work he was doing, all the while ignoring the pain he felt when he moved his body. He now understood why some of the badly damaged ninjas chose to commit suicide instead of living with that much pain. Unlike them though, he had the hope of getting rid of the pain soon. Meanwhile, a team of Naruto's clones was trying and failing badly to overcome the huge weakness of mind attacks, losing control of their body while materializing their mindscape in the outside world. It was something that they didn't like, but they couldn't overcome this problem yet. They had tried several ideas already but none had any successes, although they didn't give up. They tried to keep a part of their mindscape in the body to be able to do both at the same time, but it was like trying to separate a river in two. It worked for a while but in the end the two parts sought each other to become one again. They thought about using clones for the technique and thus keep the original safe, but they quickly learned that it wasn't so simple. When a clone is created, a copy of the mind is created too. But unlike the original, the copy of the mind is quite frail, even frailer than the clone itself. Because of this, trying to attack someone's mind using a clone was like trying to pierce a rock with paper, impossible. Fortunately, this didn't stop them from training, but in practice, only the original would be able to do any effective mind attack. The clone sighed in frustration and looked at the other members of his team as they were working before going back to work too. Unknown place, a week later. In a dark room, a giant statue was sitting on the ground. Only the upper part of the statue's body seemed to get out of the ground. Two hands were in front of the face. Upon each finger of the statue, a blurry image of a person was visible. One of the tallest shapes spoke. "This is the second time we are gathered in this month. Talk about breaking records. You wonder why we don't see too often with an ugly face like yours, Kisame?" Another shape spoke, grinning like a madman. "Up yours and your retarded god, Hidan." Kisame replied to a screaming Hidan who nastily waved back. "Hidan, shut up, you are wasting my time as it is." Another shape close to Hidan spoke lazily. "What time? The only thing you do is counting your money all day long. Are you taking me for a thief, Kakuzu? It is like you think I will steal it, greedy bastard." Hidan yelled back to a stoic Kakuzu. "Money is everything in this world. You should already be happy that I am hanging with a broken fool like you. Not my fault if your god was so poor he couldn't advertise his cult to the world. Kakuzu, I will kill you." Hidan yelled, but Kakuzu ignored him and instead scoured his ears like everything was perfectly fine. "How the hell are you two still alive with such behavior?" Another wondered out loud. "Maybe it is because they are competent, senpai. Only the weak ones die in this organization after all." An obnoxious voice was heard beside the earlier one. "Are you implying I am weak, Tobi?" The first voice asked with a vein on his forehead. "Of course not, Deidara, senpai, just a coward. But it is a good trait to have. You were able to flee from Konoha teams. This is nothing to sneeze at." Tobi quickly blurted while nodding with himself at the end. Deidara was about to kick the snot out of him when the shape that seemed to possess concentric circles in the eyes interrupted them. "We are not here to listen to your squabble. We are here because Zetsu possesses new information." Everyone looked at the shape with two large Venus flytrap extensions that enveloped his head and upper body as he spoke. "Orochimaru is dead," was his short sentence that incited a disinterested reaction from the others. "I wanted to kill him myself," Deidara commented, pouting like a child. "It would have happened anyway with the number of people he pissed off." Kisame offhandedly said, "Who killed him?" He asked Zetsu, who promptly answered, "Uchiha Sasuke." Your brother must have grown if he was able to take care of that snake, Itachi." Kisame looked at the shape beside him, who said nothing and instead closed his eyes. "He has assembled a team specifically to track you down, Itachi," Zetsu finally said, looking at Itachi expecting a reaction, but none came. "Among them are Jugo, the origin of Orochimaru's cursed seal, Suigetsu Hazuka, and Karen." "Hazuka, you said? Not bad, he was claimed as a prodigy in the art of killing back in the days. I wonder how long it would take me to chop his limbs." Kisame grinned happily as he said that. "This changed nothing of our plans, Hidan, Kakuzu. I expect you to deliver the Nibi shortly. The other teams, you already have your assignment." The leader was about to dismiss them when he was cut off. "That is not all," Zetsu quickly said as the leader looked at him intently. "There has been an attack on Konoha." At this, most of them widened their eyes, surprised that someone would launch an attack on one of the Great Five Ninja Village. It seems that the target was an underground facility that housed something important for Konoha. I wasn't able to find what it contained, but I did learn who did it. He looked at his fellow nins as they seemed tired of waiting for him to speak. Naruto Uzumaki infiltrated the facility and got away from the village. Because Konoha can't afford to be without a Jinchuriki right now, officially he is in training with Jiraiya of the Sannin. Unofficially, extreme caution is to be used when dealing with him. The missing nins digested the information they were given and wondered what exactly was in that facility to make someone as loyal as the Kyuubi Jinchuriki go crazy to the point of attacking his village. It is like they are afraid of confronting him directly. Why is that? Kakuzu wondered out loud. Apparently, while in the process of escaping, he went toes to toes with Tsunade fighting at full power and was able to get away. No further information was available, unfortunately. Very well. This may be your chance to get him without Konoha interference. Itachi, Kisame. This time I won't accept any excuses coming from you. You are dismissed, the leader said before disappearing from the room. He was quickly followed by the others as their meeting had came to an end and they had other things to do. Fire Country Mountain, at the top. There were two kinds of people. The one that were charismatic enough to lead and the one that followed those on top. Kabuto was the latter of the two. All his life he had been under the thumbs of powerful ninjas. It began with Sasori of the Red Sands, although for his defense he didn't choose that position. He could still remember how he met the missing nin and was soundly beaten to the ground. It was only because of Sasori's mercy that he was left alive. In return he became Sasori's spy willingly or not, thanks to a clever seal that was implanted on his body. During those years he learned quite a lot as he was given a purpose to live no matter how malicious the purpose was. He had seen the way Sasori used dead corpses as puppets and had by then been fascinated by the art of manipulating the dead. In the hope of strengthening his already vast knowledge in the art, he learned medicinal techniques. After all, the best way to understand the dead was to understand the livings. At least that is what he thought. It wasn't long before his prowess in the medicinal art gained the attention the snake Sanin. His relation with the late Sasori was also a bonus. That is why when Sasori sent Kabuto to spy on Orochimaru, the latter used this opportunity to free Kabuto from the Sasori's influence, by removing the seal, and use him for his own purpose. That is how Kabuto came to be under the thumb of another master. Once again, he didn't complain as it allowed him to pursue his quest of knowledge. Granted, the life of a spy was a dangerous one, it still brought tremendous advantages to him as he had access to forbidden lore he would otherwise had never gained. One of his greatest achievements was the creation of his regeneration technique using the knowledge he had amassed. It was a combination of his expertise in the medicinal art and the art of manipulating the dead that allowed him to create such technique. A technique that defied the natural order of things. Orochimaru had of course been interested in it, but upon hearing the knowledge he would have to master first to use it, he quickly diverted his attention elsewhere as he already had his own regenerating technique. He could always learn it later on when he got the time. This worked perfectly for Kabuto, as he had neither the will nor the time to teach it to his master. Sasuke too learned of the specifics of the jutsu and tried to copy it. The result was as expected, he failed spectacularly. To keep his ego unbroken, Sasuke deemed the jutsu worthless. But it didn't matter in the end, because it meant no one would steal his hard-game technique. When another person expressed the wish to learn the elusive technique, he at first dismissed the person as being foolish to even think he could. Not to mention the fact that it was the dead last of Konoha, the one genin labeled as worthless in anything other than brute strength, that tried to acquire the technique. Of course he wouldn't take Naruto seriously. But that notion changed when he was not only captured by said genin, but held prisoner for several weeks straight. Don't get him wrong, he could be captured like every other ninjas, but he had never been held prisoner for more than a few days at most before finding a way to escape. This time around he found no opportunity to get away. His hopes had even decreased when he found out it wasn't Konoha that held him prisoner but Naruto himself. How had he learned that? Maybe the fact that no one came around during his time as a prisoner, or maybe because the team of Naruto's clones had moved him far away from the village for a long time now. Of course he thought it could be a plot to make him cave in quickly, but he didn't think Konoha would risk him escaping by leaving him with a genin that had been deemed as a flight risk. After careful analysis he concluded that Naruto really kept him prisoner no matter how scary it was, as the latter was unpredictable in his method to obtain information from him. During his time in this mountain he tried to find an opportunity to escape but found none. The clones kept him under watch 24 hours a day, never leaving him alone. He was given food and water once every 3 days to further weaken him in case he tried to escape. One thing he was able to glean though was that Naruto was training on the other side of the mountaintop. Training for what he had no idea, but he hoped it wasn't something that would be used against him. Today though was different as the air was very chilly and he had a bad feeling. It only worsened when he saw an injured-looking Naruto slowly walking toward him, a smirk firmly plastered on his face. Within moments his abductor was standing in front of him while the team of clones held him down in a kneeling position. How the mighty have fallen. I half expected you to shout at me the moment you saw me. Naruto spoke as he eyed his captive, briefly looking at his body. Then again, with the little amount of energy you have, you must be saving it for a pointless escape attempt. Knowing that Naruto was baiting him, he remained silent and observed him. He was trying to predict Naruto's next course of action but was failing so far. No matter how much he analyzed everything, he couldn't find Naruto's goal. Had he given up on learning his secret technique? He wondered, as further interrogation about it never happened. The truth was that Naruto was unreadable to him. You must be wondering what I want? He heard Naruto ask and shuddered. It was frightening to know that your enemy could read you while you couldn't do the same. For several days now I have been training in mind attacks with only one purpose, to invade your mind. You said that it didn't matter if you wanted to teach me as I had neither the knowledge nor the talent to learn from you, but I beg to differ. Your mind will provide me with plenty of knowledge and all I need to learn that technique of yours. Kabuto's eyes widened in shock as he listened to Naruto. Of course he knew that Naruto could learn his technique if he could somehow get a hold of his memories, but he knew the latter lacked the mind attacks needed to do so. To learn that his enemy had taken a whole week to learn mind attacks solely to obtain his needed information was scary. But that fear quickly vanished as he reminded himself that it took decades to reach the level needed to attack someone's mind, especially his own. That was why a ghost of a smile appeared on his lips as he defiantly looked at Naruto. You expect me to believe that you have reached the level needed to literally mind rape me? He laughed even more as he saw how serious Naruto looked. Even if it were the case, do you think I wouldn't learn of ways to protect my mind, especially in my line of job? The last part was said with a sneer as he waited for Naruto to cave in, but the latter did none of that. He simply grinned like he didn't care and put his hand on his head. We will just have to see who is more proficient, won't we? Was the last thing he heard as his eyes rolled in the back of his head. Lazily standing in what looked like an unending clearing was Naruto. He looked around himself, assessing the world he landed in. The whole clearing looked rather gloomy even for Kabuto's standard, but that was to be expected for someone with such obsession with the dead. In front of him was what looked like a giant cemetery that stretched so far away he couldn't see the end of it. He is using a cemetery as a mindscape? Naruto wondered as he looked around himself. Having an idea just what the tombs scattered around the place would be used for, Naruto sighed before putting one knee on the ground, quickly followed by the palm of his right hand. Upon touching the ground he closed his eyes in concentration before opening them again. Unlike before, the ground was now replaced by two main colors. The first one was purple and covered about 99% of the clearing, while the second one was blue and covered the rest. The blue color was under Naruto's feet and represented Naruto's own mindscape, while the purple one represented Kabuto's. This was something he had learned quickly when training in corrupting the mind of his targets. He first trained on his clones before sending them to a village at the bottom of the mountain to try it on unsuspecting people. During his training he came to assimilate the corruption of one mind to one simple concept, a territorial battle. When you attack someone's mind, you are essentially converting their mindscape to your own, thereby overriding theirs. The more ground you take, the more information you gain. That is why he came up with a technique to see the amount of territory he had overrode instead of guessing. Once that was done, he nodded to himself before initializing the strategy he created in order to easily corrupt a target's mind. Slowly, a white mist erupted from his body before forming several strange-looking creatures that flew away while he advanced toward the tombs. Just as he expected, several dead people got out of the tombs. So this is his defensive system? How human-like to use dead ninjas as guards, Naruto thought as he looked at several dead bodies with Junin ninja attires. They were quick to attack him with powerful elemental techniques that would be quite impossible to do in the real world. Before the elements could touch Naruto though, they simply vanished as if they never existed in the first place. If the dead ninjas had any emotions they surely would have widened their eyes, but as it was they remained stoic. In the blink of an eye Naruto was behind the group of ninjas, and like a puppet without his string, they fell to the ground, slowly turning to ash. None knew what had happened and there wouldn't be anyone to wonder, as Naruto kept moving toward the other end of the clearing. A mile or so away, Kabuto stood in attention, observing the quick progress of his enemy. He couldn't believe what he was seeing, it was simply unheard of. Not even an hour had passed and Naruto was already closing on his position. He could only marvel at the ease Naruto dispatched his guards. Even Giant Snake Summon did nothing to stop him, and that was something to behold. The power of his mental constructs directly depended on the mastery of his mindscape. The more understanding he had of his mindscape, the stronger the constructs became. He wasn't someone who bragged about his accomplishments, but he knew that he had mastered his mindscape a long time ago. Proof of that was the fact that even the best interrogators in Auto couldn't get past his first defenses. To see a kid bypasses them as if they were made of paper was both frustrating and appalling. This only means one thing. Naruto must really have mastered this art to an unprecedented level, he thought as he saw Naruto dispatch one of his most powerful guard, the Nidaime Hokage, by turning the area in an arid desert before increasing the air pressure around the Nidaime, making him implode. An angry growl escaped his mouth before he moved himself to meet with his current nemesis with only one thing in mind: beat the shit out of him until the latter begged for mercy. Meanwhile, Naruto kept moving at his leisurely toward his target, a giant castle covered by what looked like an energy dome. So far he was disappointed in Kabuto. He could understand the appeal in using legendary ninjas to protect his mind, but it was simply too narrow-minded for his taste. This was something he noticed in almost every person he had attacked and that possessed a modicum of competency in protecting his mind. They limited themselves to the human ability. This was clearly stupid, as their mindscape was theirs to do as they pleased. They could create unheard of ability that would surprise the attackers, but they did none of the above. Most of his own mindscape attacks were completely imagined and he couldn't replicate them in the real world, not that he had tried anyway. What in being the god of their mindscape could they not understand? He wondered as he walked toward the castle. Suddenly he jumped backward as an angry Kabuto fell where he was before like a hammer, creating a huge crater. "This is as far as you will go," Kabuto growled as Kusanagi materialized in his hand. He sent Naruto a death glare, but the latter seemed unaffected. "I was wondering when you would come. I even started to think you were hiding yourself," Naruto dismissively told Kabuto. "You think that because you have reached so this deep in my mind, you have won?" Within moments Kabuto was upon Naruto, slashing his sword on his torso. The attack was so fast that Naruto never saw him move in the first place. "You are in for a rude awakening. I am different from my constructs, about 1,000 times if you want to know," he yelled while grinning madly as Naruto was backing away from him. So fast, Naruto thought, as Kabuto was forcing him in the defensive. He ducked a slash above his head only to receive a knee to his chin. A punch to his rib came next before he felt a searing pain in his feet. He looked down only to see the ground having turned in molten lava. His eyes widened before he jumped to the sky, but waiting for him was Kabuto with an axe kick that sent him back to the lava. Kabuto watched as Naruto sunk in the hot liquid gleefully, happy for a job well done. He looked around himself to check that Naruto was really dead, and upon finding nothing he smiled. A laser-like beam went through his belly, violently erasing his smile, making him turn around to see who attacked him, but what he saw stunned him. Behind him stood 4 misty-like creatures that combined before slowly reforming his nemesis body that looked at him with a smile. "Impressive. For you to possess such power even in your mindscape, you must really be at master level. You really surprised me for an instant." Kabuto scowled at the condescending tone but didn't let it distract him. "I don't know how you were able to do that, but it mattered not. In the end you will fall like others before you. Didn't you realize yet that I am invincible in this world? Look around you. I can command the nature with a simple wave of my hand." He gloated as he created a tsunami with a flick of his wrist that was launched at an unmoving Naruto. "You haven't noticed it yet, have you?" Naruto softly asked as the tsunami simply vanished as if it had never been there in the first place. All around the two fighters the landscape was covered by 2 colors, purple and blue. Unlike before though, the blue was everywhere. The only place it wasn't was a few meters away from Kabuto, who had long since realized what it means. How?" He stuttered, completely overwhelmed by what was happening. "How did you conquer my lands without me noticing?" The desperation was clear in his voice as he could feel himself slowly losing whatever control he had left over his mind. "It is simple really. I applied a type of attack I always use in battle, clones. Was the simple reply. But that is impossible. It is impossible to create a copy of the mindscape. The copies will always seek each other too quickly to be of any use. Kabuto yelled as he felt himself slowly drifting to unconsciousness. What you say is true, but who said you couldn't extend the time before the copies seek each other? He ignored the medic. Kabuto gasped and continued. What I did was simply attack your mind from several points at the same time. Of course I distracted you by making a frontal assault. You were so focused on the one destroying your constructs that you never noticed other parts of your mind being overridden by my clones. Even then I would have noticed the decrease in my power if you were slowly taking control. Kabuto's eyes widened at this point as he finally learned the last piece of the puzzle. You let me keep my power until you had gained enough control of my mind as not to arouse suspicions. You bastard. He never finished that sentence as his mind was completely overwhelmed by Naruto's. Once that was done, the landscape shattered like glasses, letting place to several pieces of paper surrounding a huge brain. Naruto looked at it with a genuine smile because he had taken control of Kabuto's mind. I can finally learn everything about that regeneration technique, he said out loud as he looked at the different pieces of paper that represented Kabuto's memories. Konoha, Hokage's office. Meanwhile, the tension was high in Tsunade's office. Currently faced with several ninjas all belonging to the Konoha 12, Tsunade's face was grim as she was digesting the information she received from one of Jiraiya's Toad summon. The information delivered was so important and surprising that it completely changed the game. Of course it was bound to happen someday, but they thought it wouldn't come to pass for a long time yet. She looked at her subordinates and couldn't help the frown that marred her face. In front of her stood the members of Team 8 Hinata Hyuga, Kiba Inuzuka and Shino Aburame, and Team 7 or what was left of it, Sakura Haruno, Kakashi Hitaki and Yamato. While they were powerful in their own right, she couldn't help the thought of them being too weak to deal with the mission she was about to give them. First was Kiba. He was a Chunin and quickly on his way to become a Junin. He had progressed tremendously, especially in taijutsu and clan-related techniques. Unfortunately, his progression rate was great only when compared with normal ninja. He didn't think it would be that great against the ones she was sending them after. Then there was Hinata. While she had lost her annoying stutter and had gained more confidence in herself, she hadn't reached her true potential yet. She was a Chunin like her teammate. She will be great for scouting the targets, Tsunade thought as she moved her analysis to the last member of Team 8. Shino, the only special Junin of the team. He was still as stoic as ever. Nothing could really surprise him these days. Unlike his two teammates, Tsunade found him well on his way to reach his true potential, especially if what his father had said was true about the kind of bees he was now using. Next, Tsunade looked at her own student with a mixture of pride and shame. Pride because Sakura was well on her way to surpass even her in the medicinal art. It was only a matter of experience now, and that was something she would acquire soon enough. Shame because her student's abilities in combat was average at best. Not what would be expected from someone apprenticed to a legendary Sannin like her. Despite everything, she is still not ready. Her body cannot cope with the stress generated by my secret technique. After this mission I will have to increase her physical training. Right now she is by far the weakest of the 3 Sannin apprentices. Sooner or later they will fight, and I hope she is ready by then or she will be eaten whole by them, she thought while narrowing her eyes. To Sakura's right was her first teacher Kakashi. Tsunade looking at him and nodded. She knew he could have become more than what he was, but tragic events decided otherwise. At least he has resumed his training, was her thought concerning the white-haired man. Finally she looked at Yamato and was happy with the level the latter reached, especially in controlling her grandfather wood jutsus. Without any notes whatsoever, Yamato was able to recreate some of the late Shoden jutsus, and that was nothing to sneeze at. Her study over, she looked at all of them and grimly spoke. A few hours ago, I received important intelligence from Jiraiya. This information was so important and unexpected I decided to gather all of you for a special mission. The mission will begin immediately after this debriefing. Everyone looked at her and stiffly waited for an explanation, knowing the matter was important. I will get to the point. Orochimaru the Snake Sannin is dead. She ignored the bulging eyes in favor of detailing the information. From what Jiraiya was able to gather, a fight erupted in one of his bases and the result was his death. Immediately afterward, all of his bases erupted in anarchy as they are fighting to determine who will become the next leader. Who killed him? Kakashi asked, having put away his favorite reading material. Tsunade looked directly at Sakura as she answered the question. Uchiha Sasuke. If they weren't shocked before, they were now expressing disbelief at hearing their late companion was able to dispatch such legendary ninja. Sakura on the other hand had a smile on her face as she guessed her estranged teammate would finally come back to Konoha no matter how ludicrous the thought seemed. I see. Kakashi began as he sighed and scratched the back of his head like Naruto used to do. Tsunade noticed the gesture but she made no comment. I suppose you have assembled this team to hunt him down in the hope of capturing him, haven't you? Once again Tsunade was pleasantly reminded how much Kakashi was able to read under the lines. You guessed right, Kakashi. With Orochimaru out of the way, it is obvious that Sasuke will make a move on his brother Itachi. And considering how dangerous Itachi is and the possibility of confronting him during our mission, you chose to send 2 teams instead of 1 to deal with Itachi. Yamato continued as the others attentively listened. You are partially right about that. It is true that I chose 2 teams to deal with Itachi in case it happened, but it is also because you will need that much number should you encounter Sasuke himself. Surely this is too much for him. I like the concept of using big guns to squash bugs, but isn't it too much? Kiba protested loudly while boasting their capabilities. You assume Sasuke is at the same level as you are. Tsunade replied, shutting Kiba's mouth. I suppose you could be excused as you didn't know Sasuke fought Sakura, Yamato and another Chunin-level ninja and remained unscathed while sparing them. The members of Team 8 looked at Sakura and Yamato in shock while the latters looked down in shame. You are also forgetting the fact that he was able to kill Orochimaru, someone so far out of your league it wouldn't even be fair to compare you to him. Finally, it seems the Gaki has assembled a team before going after his brother. All in all, this mission will be very difficult no matter which Uchiha you happen to deal with. The ninjas nodded at their leader's words and were about to be on their way to fulfill their mission when they were stopped again. Another piece of information I think you should get. It is even more important than this mission. You surely have heard that Jiraiya took Naruto on a trip for further training. At the Konoha ninja's nod she continued. Then forget everything about it because it is a lie. Team 8 and 9 looked back at Tsunade in wonder, as they had no idea what was going on and why Jiraiya would lie about such thing. Come to think of it, they haven't seen him ever since he came back from the mission to Rice Country. They were now curious on what was really going on. What I am about to tell must never leave this room because it was deemed as an S-rank secret by the council, and yes, they know the truth. She added the last part upon seeing Kakashi looked at her suspiciously. Yamato, who already knew what had happened, as he was present during the debacle, simply looked back at Tsunade. Naruto is not in the village because he has as of several days now become a missing nin to approach very cautiously. Everybody shared a stunned look, as they couldn't imagine the loudmouth that was Naruto abandons the village like that. Something must have happened and something drastic, they thought as they anxiously waited for Tsunade to elaborate. What you have to understand is that Naruto has grown not knowing about his family, and if he even had one. I don't know how, but he recently obtained information about his family, more precisely his late clan the Uzumaki, something that was jealously kept secret especially from him. Knowing he wouldn't get his answer from us, he attacked the village to obtain the much sought after information. She looked at Sakura, who covered her mouth with her hand in shock. Yes, the attack that happened a week ago was his doing. She confirmed Sakura's fear while looking at the others ninjas present that were too shocked to react. Because he was able to get away with the information he wanted and much more, the council is still debating on how to deal with him, as he is now blackmailing us because the information he got could be disastrous for Konoha if it fell into the wrong hands. She locked her arms under her chin. The order I am issuing to you is simple. Should you encounter him, if you are 100% sure that you will be able to capture or kill him, you are to do so. If there is even a chance of him getting away, disengage and let him be. By this point Hinata was looking at Tsunade with puffy red eyes, as she couldn't believe her Naruto would do something like that. She didn't even notice as they were dismissed from the office or that Kiba put his hand over her neck and helped her move. Each one of them was lost in their thoughts, trying to understand what the hell was going on in their village. But soon they would forget everything about that, as they would be facing death. Sitting at the edge of a cliff was Naruto. He was garbed with a large black cloak. The hood of the cloak was dangling on his shoulder, leaving his face visible for anyone to see. For the past few days he had taken to sit on that place to meditate. While something surprising for him, he took this exercise as easily as fish took to swimming. It became a necessity after a while as it helped him get in touch with his supply of chakra. The end result was his control growing by leaps and bounds. He had long since completed all the existing chakra control exercises, but despite this accomplishment, he was far from having perfect control over his energy. That is why he undertook a brainstorming to create new ways of improving his control. The meditation he was doing was one of the several exercises he came up with. In the end though, he reached a level of control over his chakra, adequate enough to be able to use the technique he stole from Kabuto. The regeneration technique. It had been a relief for him to finally be capable of walking without feeling excruciating pain. After having taken the information directly from Kabuto's mind, it took him a little more than a week to perfectly learn the technique. While still not as proficient as Kabuto, he made it up by not being limited to the amount of chakra he used to heal himself. Concretely, using this technique for Kabuto was like using a scalpel, while Naruto's own use matched that of a knife. Naruto wasted too much energy to accomplish the same task, but that wasn't an issue for someone like him. Naruto, still looking at the forest far below him, felt one of his clones approaches him from behind and immediately turned around to face him. "If you are here, it means you have completed your review of the scrolls then?" he asked his clone, who slowly nodded while sitting beside him. "I left the other ones to look at the information once again just in case we missed something, but I am positive everything was accounted for." Naruto sighed at that. They, as in the clones and him, have been looking at the scrolls coming from the archives ever since he finished sorting them, and the more they looked at it, the more unanswered questions they got. "We were supposed to find an answer to Uzugakure destruction, but in the end we only found more questions." The clone spoke after a moment of silence. The first question would be why the first Hokage gave away the tailed beast to the other villages. Naruto added without looking at his clone. Instead he slowly exhaled as if he was still doing a meditation breathing exercise. There are too many speculations to be sure of anything. It could be that he really wanted to balance each country's power. The clone replied only for Naruto to scoff at the idea. This is just a propaganda to make the Shoden seems like a peaceful man, but the countless missions he sanctioned in those archives are proof that he was anything but. If nothing else, he was more like a ruthless leader who would stop at nothing to bring Konoha to the top. The clone just nodded, knowing the kind of missions Konoha did back then when they were a newly formed village. He had never been more convinced about the saying, "History is written by the winners." None without the knowledge kept in the archives could understand just how far Konoha went to become the top dog of this world and to keep the position for so long. They would systematically destroy any power that had the potential of rivaling them. That was their real politic. Do you think he gave the beasts in the hope of destroying the other villages? The clone suggested again to a contemplative Naruto. That is a possibility. After all, every country that received a Biju suffered high causalities before they were able to subdue them. And that was only because my clan gave away the knowledge needed to create the seals to subdue them. Why did they give it away anyway? The clone wondered out loud. Naruto didn't have an answer to this question though. As it was, he was stumped as to why his clan would go out of its way to help strangers that clearly were power hungry. It wasn't difficult to come to the same conclusion, as all of them were quick enough to accept the Shoden proposal without even taking into account their own protection against the weapon they sought. The question remained then, if he could realize this, then surely experienced members of his late clan should have seen the same, so why would they help them? Especially when the consequence of this lone act was the advertising of their capabilities in the sealing arts. That act had been the catalyst to all the problems the Uzumaki clan faced later on. By showing to the world that they were that advanced in this arcane of power, they became a worldwide threat. The power granted to a practitioner of the sealing art was clearly too great to be dismissed. He looked back at his clone and replied, "I don't know why they did it, but they must have had a reason. I simply cannot fathom them doing something so reckless without something to gain in return." He looked at his clones still reading the scrolls. "Forget about the Shoden for now. Did you notice that there were only a few battles involving ninjas against other ninjas in the First Shinobi World War?" "Yeah, I did. This is also very strange. Compared to the other wars, the first was like a series of skirmishes. The only important event of the war was the death of the second Hokage. The Shoden having been slain just before the war started. Yes, Naruto nodded. Surprisingly, the group that took most of the damage was the samurai. The war was fought mostly by them, and in the end, very few survived. Nowadays, they are only found in Iron Country. Both of them remained quiet after that, as they still couldn't make sense to the information they acquired. There were several pieces of information they couldn't quite understand, as they weren't exactly in the correct perspective. An example was the fact that the Second Shinobi World War was caused by Konoha, as the latter wanted to expand its territory. Seeing this, the other countries reacted in kind, which triggered the war, and soon enough, every country joined the battle. None wanted to be left behind and see as their neighbors gained in power and land. Iwa wanting to take their revenge on Konoha for the last war caused the Third Shinobi War. This one act, while not suspicious, was strange in the fact that they waited for almost 20 years to act. Some would say they were amassing resources and waiting for the right time to strike, but that was incorrect, because a decade before the start of the war, they were already ready for it and had the number needed to do so. The final piece of information that struck them as odd was the Land of Sky. It was a hidden village that possessed advanced technology and challenged the 5 great nations during the Second War. They attacked Konoha and quickly overwhelmed them thanks to their technology and by attacking from the sky. But on the verge of completely destroying Konoha, they surrendered. Just like that, they surrendered. They had Konoha on the palm of their hand, but they withdrew from the war. Of course, in the information available to the public, the 5 great villages in a counterattack destroyed the Land of Sky. But from the archive he learned the truth, that none of the village could rival against them. The Land of Sky had all but won the war when something happened that caused them to fall back. What? No one knew, and it wasn't explained in the archives. At this point Naruto could only guess that the Land of Sky was somehow forced to surrender. But even thinking about a power able to subdue a country that had the 5 great countries on their knees was astonishing at best. He shuddered as he guessed the power that would be needed for such task. He was about to keep the conversation going with his clone when he sensed another chakra signature closing on them. Having been in contact with the individual holding this particular signature, he relaxed somewhat and waited until the person was standing a meter or so away from him. Kabuto. The person slowly kneeled in front of Naruto, neither showing anger nor surprise at being recognized so easily. He was wearing a brown coat that covered his whole body. The coat was large enough that it was difficult to determine whether the owner was male or female. Furthermore, a mask was covering his face, not unlike the one Hitaki Kakashi usually wore. "Master," Kabuto replied without meeting Naruto's eyes, not that the latter was looking in his direction. "I am here to report that I am well enough to accomplish whatever task you have for me." The emotionless tone reminded Naruto of Sai's voice. The only difference being that one gained it through mental fortitude to hide his emotions. It had been a shock to Naruto when he found out that Kabuto had lost almost all of his emotions following his mind rape. At first he thought he had been too rough on the young man before him when he searched through his mind, but further investigation revealed that he wasn't the one behind Kabuto's current plight. No, the ones responsible for this were Kabuto's former masters, Sasori and Orochimaru. When Sasori turned Kabuto into his spy, the latter undertook a process that completely wiped his mind clean. Such thing would have been lethal for the man if he wasn't so young when it happened. In any case, the damage was done and Kabuto lost the psyche he gained while growing up. Orochimaru, by removing the seal that Sasori applied, further shattered Kabuto's mind. He was still able to function normally, but his mind became so frail that even a simple mind attack would have proven fatal for him if the attack had worked. The fact that Kabuto trained his mind to keep others from finding out his spying activities was the only thing that kept him safe all these years, as none had been able to overcome his mental defenses. Now came Naruto. Upon taking over Kabuto's mind and searching through it for the information he needed, Kabuto's mind broke from the strain to the point of destroying his then current psyche, leaving behind an empty husk. He was still able to function properly and still possessed the skills he developed over the years, but his mind wasn't in the right place in a manner of speech. Then again, had his mind ever been in the right place? Nonetheless, Naruto was then confronted to a difficult decision to make. He could dispose of Kabuto as his usefulness had expired, or he could make use of the latter. Both solutions had their advantages and drawbacks, but in the end Naruto chose to make use of Kabuto's talents by thoroughly brainwashing him. A task that was extremely easy given Kabuto's state of mind at that time. The final result was kneeling in front of him and was completely devoted to him. He thought he would feel bad for doing such thing to Kabuto, but in the end he didn't find it in himself to care about it. Have you regained the use of your skills? The clone beside Naruto asked the kneeling ninja. Yes. Physically wise, I have regained all my former motor skills. Same with my strength. And everything else? I have tested all my former techniques to see if I still could do them, and the result was satisfying. Although I noticed a slight decrease in the speed at which I can use them while in battle. Did you find the cause? My guess is that I do not have any memories of using them in real combat. Taking this guess as a fact, I concluded that the only thing left to do would be to regain my experience by doing missions. Kabuto explained while looking at the clone he was speaking to. He turned his head though when the original finally spoke. Very well. I have in mind the perfect mission for you. It will be easy enough if the news I heard in the world out there is indeed true. Seek out the clone observing the ones currently reading, and he will explain to you what your mission will entail. Kabuto nodded as he moved away, toward the clone he was sent after. Naruto watched the process without flinching. Mirth could be seen in his eyes as he ironized at having Kabuto as his own servant. Do you think it is a good idea? Naruto looked at his clone again as the latter elaborated. Can we trust Kabuto? I know you pretty much erased his mind and made him think that he has always been loyal to you when you injected those false memories, but by sending him out there is a chance that he will encounter someone from his past. The clone looked at his creator with a concerned expression. Don't worry about that. Even if he comes to suspect anything, it will be too late anyway. In the meantime, we will deal with more pressing issues. Naruto replied to his double while he rose from the ground. Is it time already? The clone wondered as he looked at the stretching Naruto. Yes, now that I am back to full health, I can go back to my previous agenda. I see. Mirroring Naruto's action, the clone stood up. You are going to the ruins of Whirlpool Country then? He asserted as Naruto simply shrugged as if the matter wasn't important. You are right. I think I have delayed my trip long enough now. I think it is time to face the ghost of my past. You speak as if you've been there at some time. The clone smirked as he saw his creator glare at him. What? You have never been there or known someone of that country in the first place. There is simply no reason for you to use ghosts of my past. Asshole, you can't stop yourself from ruining my dramatic speech, can you? He glared to a grinning clone that mouthed, "Nope," before moving toward the reading clones. Naruto sighed at its clone behavior and almost regretted the fact that each one was different, if only by a small margin. They each possessed their own individuality. Having already packed everything he possessed and sealed it in a scroll, except the archives that would be hidden in a safe place by his clones, he moved at the edge of the mountain and looked below him. He couldn't even see the bottom of the mountain as he was too far up to discern anything. He estimated the elevation to be around 2 kilometers. He could feel the strong wind that threatened to throw him off the cliff. Only his applied chakra on his feet kept him from falling. He knew what he was about to do was dangerous and reckless, but he couldn't help it. He wanted to raise his adrenaline after all this time without action. He plotted his path and, like an expert pool diver, he jumped a few meters away from the cliff with his arms and legs outstretched and his body parallel to the ground. He could feel the strong air resistance that tried to push him back. He could feel the gravity that ruthlessly pushed him to the ground. He could also feel the biting wind that scarred his face. He could feel all of this at the same time. But he didn't mind. The air resistance was ignored, the gravity was welcomed, and the cuts on his body were healed almost as fast as they appeared. Before long, he touched the mountain slope and with practical ease, he controlled his speed to a bearable level. He dodged any obstacle in his path like an expert runner. He was running almost vertically. For what seemed like an eternity to him, while in reality it was less than a minute, he skimmed the slope until he reached the trees of the bottom of the mountain. For a person looking from ground level, the only thing they would see was a cloud of dust falling from the top of the mountain at an unimaginably fast speed. They would then expect whatever it was to crash on the ground, but what happened was simply too unreal to understand. Before touching the ground, the cloud made a 90-degree turn and moved a little above the trees. Then, upon coming in contact with the top of one of the trees, a shockwave blew away the cloud, leaving nothing behind to explain the phenomenon. Only a deafening sound was left as a reminder of it. Thanks to his unreal speed, Naruto was already more than 200 meters away. Despite the way he moved, he still could easily discern every little details on his path. That is the reason why he quickly noticed the huge wall of hardened earth that rose off the ground 100 or so meters away in front of him. Were he a regular ninja, he would have crashed on the wall due to the speed at which he was moving. As it was, he wasn't a regular one. That is why he was able to slow down his speed until he was a few meters away from the wall. Then he jumped above it, with the intent of landing on top of it. His eyes widened though when the top wall turned itself into spikes that seemed intent on drilling through him. Maneuvering through them, he was able to dodge each once until he found himself between two spikes with his feet resting on their side. He sighed in relief, but it was short-lived as he heard a sizzling sound. Boom! A deafening sound covered the area, lifting dust around and letting place to falling chunk of earth. 20 meters beside the impact area, Naruto appeared. He looked at the cloud of dust in relief. I would have been toast if I wasn't touching solid surface. He thought as he was once again reminded that for his speed technique to work he needed to have a support stand. The surprise of the attack over, Naruto looked at his surrounding hoping to catch the one behind this ambush. He didn't delude himself into thinking that it was anything else. It was then that he noticed to his growing horror that 4 hardened wall of earth had him surrounded. Moreover, each one of them was about twice the size of the earlier wall, thereby shocking him. To be able to raise such huge wall, whoever is attacking me must be a master of earth-style jutsus. Not knowing what was happening and what would follow this attack, he looked up and prepared to jump over the wall as it was now his only way out. But what he saw stilled him. Shock, horror and despair were ones of the many feelings he was experiencing. He couldn't believe what he was seeing. It had to be a bad dream he was in. Because above him was the biggest ball of earth he had ever seen. A huge meteor was falling and his only escape had been closed off. Unknown area. Alone in his room, Sasuke laid on a bed, his eyes wide open. He had been staring at the ceiling for a moment now, lost in his thoughts. Still not strong enough, he thought as he raised his right hand to look at it. He scowled as he saw the white medical strappings that covered it. Despite all my training, he never finished his thoughts as he recalled the reason behind his current state. Following the death of his one-time master Orochimaru, he gathered strong followers that could help him achieve his dream, to kill Uchiha Itachi. On paper it was a straightforward goal, but reality-wise, it was problematic, more like close to impossible. Why? Because his brother was always with his partner, one Hoshigaki Kisame, a former member of the 7 Swordsmen of Mist and among its strongest members. He knew he could take on his brother if everything went according to the plan he prepared. But the simple interfering of Kisame or anyone else would put everything in jeopardy. That was the primary reason he gathered his team composed of Karen, Suigetsu and Jugo. Each one's possessed an unique skill set that could come in handy. Karen with her exceptional sensory ability, Suigetsu with his immunity to physical attacks and Jugo for his sheer raw power. Nevertheless, after creating his team, he immediately went after his brother. He was then faced with his second problem. How was he supposed to find Itachi when several hunter nins never could? At first he thought about looking for the one his brother was after, in other words Naruto. But the severe humiliation he received at the hands of his ex-teammate quickly removed that idea from his mind. It was one thing to go after someone you knew you could take care of, it was another to go after someone that would turn the table around and make you the hunted instead of the hunter. While he knew he was exceptionally powerful, Naruto possessed something that still made him highly dangerous for everyone, his ungodly speed. Even Orochimaru admitted when the two fought for dominance over his body that he wasn't willing to face Naruto until he had a way to negate the latter's advantage. No, he scratched that idea as quickly as it came. Surprisingly, the answer literally came knocking at his door in the form of Deidara and his partner Tobi, both members of the elusive organization his brother belonged to. And that was the reason behind his current state. The battle that ensued after the meeting was a grand one. Powerful jutsus were thrown one after the other. In the end it came down to whoever better understood the other capabilities and effectively countered them. He was obviously the one who came victorious, as unlike his opponent he was still alive. For a first battle against an Akatsuki member, he was proud of how he fared. But despite this, He couldn't get out of his mind the thought that his brother would have easily dispatched the late Deidara despite the latter's boasting of having trained himself to fight Itachi. He would have continued his sulking were it not for his teammates rushing in the room with a panicked look. Sasuke-kun, we have to leave. Sasuke slowly leaned on the bed and looked at Karen expectantly. She blushed in embarrassment when she remembered that Sasuke didn't know what was going on, unlike the other boys. Sorry about that, I was just in a hurry and forgot you weren't with us earlier. What she is trying to say is that she was so flustered by seeing you naked that she lost it. Suigetsu smirked as he said that until he felt Karen punch him. It was difficult to say if he simply didn't care or wasn't prepared for the attack. No matter, his face dissolved in water before reforming just as quickly. No traces of the attack were visible on his face. How long was I asleep? Sasuke's question stopped the two as they were in the process of threatening each other. A day long. Apparently that Deidara follow kicked your ass. Suigetsu replied while smirking at Sasuke. The latter only scowled for being reminded of his recent battle. Further discussions were stopped when the last member of the team spoke. Haven't you forgotten what made us rush here in the first place? Jugo softly asked his fellow ninjas. Yeah, Karen began as she became serious again. It seems that your last battle attracted unwanted people. Who? Sasuke, who rose from his bed, ignoring the many bandages that covered his body, interrupted her. I can't be sure yet. I have never felt their signature before, so I cannot identify them. What I do know is that there are 7 of them. She looked far away towards the woods surrounding the place they were at. Her teammates guessed she was looking in the direction those ninjas were at. 2 women and 5 men. Their level ranging from Chunin to High Junin. Also there is a dog among them. Does that help? She wondered out loud as Sasuke closed his eyes in deep concentration. There are so many people I pissed off out there, I wouldn't know which one it is. But few ninjas use dogs except probably Konoha ninjas. Only they possess a clan reputed for their use of dog, and I happen to have gone to the ninja academy with one of them. He looked at all of them as he said that. Do they know our position? Probably. They have been moving in our direction for a while now. But I wonder how they can pinpoint us from so far away. If I had to guess, I would say they must have gotten my scent after my last battle. Sasuke answered Karen's unasked question. Oh, they can do that even after so much time has passed? They must be good. Like the bloodthirsty ninja he was, Suigetsu removed his sword from his back as if preparing for the confrontation. What the hell do you think you are doing, Suigetsu? Don't you see the state Sasuke-kun is in? We had to get out of here while we still can. No need to fight a useless battle. She grumbled. Suigetsu's violent attitude was seriously pissing her off for no apparent reason. She had just never liked the guy and didn't think it would ever change. But that was fine by him as the feeling was mutual. I may have an idea. Quietly, Jugo offered his help. Once the plan was elaborated to the other members of the team, Karen couldn't help but see the giant of a man that was Jugo in a new light. A mile or so away from Team Hawk position, the Konoha team was quickly moving through the trees. They had been after the Uchiha for several days now, and finally their effort was about to be paid. A day before, as they were looking for information about the last 2 Uchiha, they saw a huge explosion not far away from their position. They investigated the source of the explosion and were pleasantly surprised to detect their target scent on the place of the battle. Although the scent abruptly disappeared, they were able to find it again after a while and were now chasing Sasuke and his team. Kiba and Akamaru were in front, the others as they followed behind. Thanks to their particular talent in tracking, Kiba and Akamaru were able to guide the team towards Sasuke's position. Unfortunately, they couldn't move too fast as it took time for Kiba to clearly discern the scent and follow it. It was while they were moving that Kiba suddenly stopped and growled. We have been detected. How so? Yamato asked the Chunin. Before there was only one track for Sasuke's scent, but for a while now, several other tracks have appeared. All leading to a different direction. Kiba bit back as he fully turned and looked at his teammates. I see. Clearly they must have noticed our approach and taken measures to destabilize us. Kakashi took it from there and calmly explained his theory. But how were they able to notice us so far away? A sensor perhaps? He wondered. What do we do now then? Sakura asked, clearly frustrated. I was this close to meeting him again. She thought. Byakugan. They all heard the unmistakable voice of Hinata as she activated her dojutsu and looked beyond what they could ever hope to see. Found them, she finally said after a moment. There are 4 of them, 2 males and 1 female. They seem to be heading northwest from here. She reported as the team quickly moved again, this time faster than before. They were quickly closing the gap between the 2 groups. Team Hawk was still fleeing from the Konoha team when Karen yelled. They are still following us and ignoring the dummy tracks. They must have a sensor too to be able to follow us like that. Shit, they just had to pick this day to chase after me. Sasuke scowled at that. He was incensed by the situation and was about to go back there and dispose of them, violently, for pestering him when Karen suddenly stopped. Likewise Sasuke, Suigetsu and Jugo stopped too and looked at her for an explanation when they saw her shaking from head to toes. Obviously she was frightened. She must have sensed something that scared her because she had never behaved like that, even in the presence of Orochimaru. What is going on now? Suigetsu asked, exasperated. Not only was he forbidden from killing a bunch of trees hugger, but he was also forced to follow a crazy girl. There are 2 signatures that appeared in my range just now. They are moving to intercept the Konoha team. Karen finally said in a whisper as if she was afraid someone would hear her. So what? Did you recognize their signature or something? Because right now you look like you have seen a ghost. Was Suigetsu's cold reply not quite getting why the girl was so scared? There were many ninjas out there, of course they would cross path with one of them at some point in their journey. You don't understand. Their chakra, it is so huge. I have never felt anyone with that much chakra. Even Orochimaru didn't possess that much chakra. And the speed at which they move. It is frightening. We had to get out of here fast. She was almost hysterical by the end of her speech. That alone was enough for Team Hawk to understand how serious the situation was. Following her advice they quickly got out of here, leaving the Konoha team to face whatever danger lurked behind them. On the other side of the forest, the Konoha ninjas were fast moving toward their target when Hinata widened her eyes and abruptly stopped. What now? Kiba wondered as she stopped beside his teammate. The others did the same too. Just now, I saw someone. No, I saw 2 people. They were moving toward us but they were so fast that I never noticed them until now. She wildly looked left and right as if she didn't trust her dojutsu to be accurate enough. This immediately alerted the others as they took a defensive stance in preparation for an attack. I told you they would be an interesting bunch, partner, especially the cute-looking girl who saw us. No wonder she was able to find us though, she is a Hyuga. A voice boomed across the clearing, not allowing the Konoha ninjas to find where it originated. But Hinata did, as her dojutsu was able to pinpoint their location and she quickly looked at one of the trees in front of her. The Konoha ninjas seeing this quickly mirrored her action, never lowering their guard as 2 ninjas walked out of the shadow and into the light. They obviously belonged to the Akatsuki, going by the black cloak with red clouds they wore. They were of average size except one of them who seemed exceptionally tall. A hat was further hiding their features, making them difficult to identify. Nonetheless, the Konoha ninjas were quite frightened by them. It was one thing to know the statistics of Akatsuki's members and plan accordingly against them. Now though they were about to go against them for real. We meet again, Hitaki Kakashi. The shorter one of the duo spoke as he tipped his hat, showing his eyes. Although unlike before, I am here in person. All of the Konoha ninjas widened their eyes, especially the former members of Team 7 when they recognized the eyes and the person possessing them. Uchiha Itachi. Somewhere in Fire Country, with Naruto. The sight that met Naruto was something akin to the after effects of a natural disaster. An humongous cloud of dust could be seen miles away. But that wasn't the worst. Where before there were flourishing trees, there now was bare ground. The forest had been destroyed. Around the impact zone, chunks of earth literally covered the ground. With the cloud and dust that was leveled, one would think they were in a wasteland. In the middle of all this, Naruto stood unflappable. The only sign of shock that could be discerned was his abnormally wide-eyed gaze. The magnitude of the attack was primarily what shocked him. He had seen devastating attacks before but never on this scale. This was way out of proportion to him. I wouldn't have escaped this if it wasn't for my quick thinking. He thought as he looked at the palm of his hand. He could see the scar in a circular pattern that was quickly healing. When he understood that he wouldn't be able to jump above the walls that had him surrounded, before the meteor crashed, he chose to force his way out. Using Udama Rasengan and his speed technique to drill through one of the walls did this. The task done, he fled the impact zone as fast as he could. Because of the hurry he was in, he didn't have time to properly create the Rasengan, which resulted in the wound on his palm. Although being alive was enough to dismiss this issue. While his body healed itself, Naruto looked at the forest that was in front of him. He was about 100 meters away from the tree line with his back facing the impact zone. "This is the first surprise of the day, you are alive," a voice said behind Naruto. Unlike the meaning of the words said, the tone implied that the voice's owner wasn't surprised at all. "And you are?" Naruto wondered out loud. He didn't turn around to look at the owner of the voice. He did conclude that it was his attacker though. Behind him stood an average-sized person. The person was covered from head to toes by a large traveling brown cloak. A hood covered its head. The only part visible was the stranger's face, but even then it was protected with an Anbu mask. In short, nothing could be discerned from the individual, its age, its gender, nothing. Before asking questions, shouldn't you face the person you are speaking with? The stranger asked back, slightly amused, to a silent Naruto. Neither talked for a while, as if gauging the limit of their patience. Still not facing his attacker, Naruto replied, "I would be inclined to do so if only you were real." The response was short but to the point. From the narrowed eyes of Naruto's attacker, he perfectly understood Naruto's illusion. "You surprise me again. To be able to differentiate my clone from my real body is no easy task. You speak as if you know me or my skills. Why is that?" Naruto fired back, not caring about the fake surprise his attacker tried to convey. "You seem to be doing a good job in analyzing my every words, so why don't you do the same to answer your question? Obviously you won't answer my questions, so I won't bother to ask you why you attacked me. You also learn fast, how curious." The lazy tone did nothing to assuage Naruto's growing concern as he gazed at the area he knew the real attacker to be hiding. This was the wrong thing to do, as upon noticing Naruto looking directly at him even though he was hidden, the stranger commanded his clone to attack. The clone behind Naruto ran at the latter at high speed as his body shimmered out of sight. Appearing directly behind Naruto, he threw a punch at Naruto's neck. Shock rode on his face when Naruto disappeared from his sight for a moment before he felt a brutal kick to his ribs. The whole time Naruto still kept his eyes trained on his attacker's real body stood. A good decision, as the real one got out of the tree's canopy and went through 3 hand seals before the ground shook. A dragon several stories tall was formed from the earth and glared menacingly at Naruto. Clearly his control over the earth element is phenomenal. Naruto thought as he zoomed toward his attacker, not caring for the beast standing in his way. Not unlike a real being, the dragon's eyes followed Naruto before spitting large mud balls at him. But Naruto was too swift as he made his way through the onslaught of balls and dodged left and right, never stopping, never retreating. His opponent seemed unperturbed by that though, as he made another handseal. The dragon stopped spitting mud balls and instead reared his head backward before abruptly diving at the incoming Naruto, his mouth wide open. Naruto's retaliation to this was swift as he reared his hands backward and gathered chakra on his palms. Once the unmistakable ball of chakra was formed in each palm, he combined the two in one hand, making it twice as big as before. Upon coming into contact with the dragon, a distinct yell of Udama Rasengan was heard as he slammed the ball inside the dragon's mouth. A violent explosion rocketed the place as the dragon was blown apart, throwing chunks of earth everywhere. From it emerged Naruto, still running toward the impassively standing stranger. The latter hadn't reacted to his attack being countered. Instead there was a gleam in his eyes. What it meant, only he knew, but it didn't bode well for Naruto. Ignoring the strange behavior of his opponent, Naruto kept running until he was but a few meters from his opponent when the ground shook again. Unlike before, a dragon didn't take shape from it. Instead, spikes at least 3 meters tall sprung from the ground, surprising Naruto, but they didn't stop his progress as he weaved through the spikes, circling his unmoving target. Still he closed the gap separating them, and before long he had a kunai in his right hand and was swinging his arm at his target. A smirk of triumph was on his face as he attacked. But it quickly changed into one of shock as around the stranger, spikes sprung from the ground faster than before in a protective shell. Naruto was faced with a quick decision to make, moving forward and severely injure his opponent but losing his arm in the process, or retreat. He chose the later and he did a backward somersault. But he wasn't fast enough as one of the spikes cut his forearm quite deeply. While in mid-air, he was able to see the smile that formed on his attacker's face. First blood, he heard him mutter much to his annoyance. Though upon touching the ground he was forced to keep doing backflip in order to dodge the spikes that sprung wherever he landed. A moment later and he was back to where he began his attack. To hell with it, Naruto thought, frustrated at having to retreat like that. On the last backflip he kept his body crouched and skidded backward, generating enough smoke to hide his movements. It worked well as the moment the cloud of dust was lifted he was gone. Barely a second later he appeared behind his opponent's back with a Rasengan fully formed and his hand thrusting forward. But what happened next definitively stumped him, as the stranger seemed to know what he was doing even with his back turned and his high speed. He expertly moved his body and caught Naruto's hand between his right armpit. A left elbow hit Naruto's stomach, forcing him to dispel the attack. He rotated his body until he faced Naruto. A snap was heard as Naruto's bone arm was broken from the sudden movement. Gritting his teeth in pain, Naruto tried to disengage but to no avail as his opponent used this close contact to deliver several well-placed punch and kick, finishing with a sweep of Naruto's leg and a spike that sprung from the ground and drilled through Naruto. Blood flew around the body in a gory display. The stranger grinned at that, but it quickly turned into a frown as a log replaced the body. He looked sideways to see Naruto holding his broken arm and looking at him in shock. How did he block my attack? I was moving almost at sound speed. He shouldn't have been able to follow me, let alone block my attack. He raged in his mind as he tried to find a reasonable answer for his technique's failure. Until now, this technique had been his life-saving ace. None could keep up with him when he moved that fast. He should know, as neither Orochimaru nor Tsunade and Sasuke even with his Sharingan could do it. To see an unknown ninja able to do so with seemingly ease didn't help in calming his already enraged state. Quiet the technique you have there, little boy. Pumping chakra in your body to enhance it that much must take quite a lot out of you. If I didn't know exactly what you were, I would say that you had at most 2 or 3 shots at using this technique before you succumbed to chakra exhaustion. The stranger said conversationally. He cared little that a few seconds ago they were engaged in a deadly fight. He looked closely at Naruto and whistled appreciatively. Wow, you are already healed from the wounds I gave you? The Kyuubi works really fast, Naruto made no attempt to correct his opponent and let him assume that it was the Kyuubi's doing for his fast recovery. Instead he focused on a way to get the upper hand on this battle. Since the beginning he had been on the losing side after all. First I need to understand how he is able to keep up with my speed. He didn't think further as his opponent spoke again. When I came here, I wasn't expecting much of a fight, but I must say that I am even more disappointed. Your taijutsu is more like street fighting. You have no ninjutsu beside the Rasengan and that speed enhancer. You expect to win your battles with this little arsenal? He ignored Naruto's incredulous look and continued. Right now it would be a massacre to keep fighting you by myself. That is why I will let you fight with something closer to your level. Around the stranger, 5 earth clones took shape from the ground. They looked definitively sturdier than the first one, but beyond that there were no differences. Naruto looked at them, then the original, in shock and concealed humiliation at what the man was implying. He had never been so angry before. He had just been pegged as nothing more than the man's clones. The shock turned into anger as he lost control of his emotionless facade. Then the anger was gone, replaced by a cold and calculating look. So you think you have me all figured? He asked his ambusher, who seemed pleased to see his inner turmoil. I am sorry, was I unclear before? Was the reply Naruto got. The bangs of Naruto's hairs fell over his face, concealing his eyes as he looked at the ground, his fists clenched. He didn't react when the 5 clones charged at him from all sides. He didn't react when they went through hand seals, presumably to launch a jutsu of a kind. He didn't react when the original muttered, weak, thinking Naruto couldn't hear from his position. But when the clones were but a meter away from him, he acted. 3 hands made of dark blue chakra sprung from the ground and rotated at high speed around their creator, forming a protective shell and destroying the 3 earth clones that weren't fast enough to escape. The other two did a backward somersault and stopped, opting to stare at the Jinchuriki in wonder. But that was their mistake, as the chakra hands flew quiet fast and ensnared them in their strong grip before crushing them like bug. The stranger looked at the display in shock. Since the beginning of the fight, this was the first time he was shocked, or at least couldn't hide it. Is he that advanced to have already mastered this aspect of being the Kyuubi Jinchuriki? He thought, not voicing his thoughts. Not that it would have mattered, as the chakra hands dissolved into nothing with Naruto stopping feeding them on chakra. It was his other ace after all. It wouldn't do for him to use it too much, lest his opponent found a weakness to it. If you want to play with clones. Naruto stared coldly at his opponent. You should at least create enough to make me sweet, asshole. To make his point, he did a hand seal, and with a puff of smoke, 50 clones appeared around him, all of them facing his target with angry eyes. The stranger idly looked at the display, his earlier shock already forgotten. Maybe I was wrong. This is shaping to be an interesting fight indeed, he thought as he slid into a fighting stance, waiting for the clones to attack. He didn't wait long, as all of them ran at him, circling their prey. Naruto looked at the stranger fight against his clones with amazement. He didn't expect something like this. The stranger was weaving around his clones, dispelling each one at a time with utter ease. In 1 minute flat, he was alone again with his opponent. Granted, the latter seemed a little tired, it still didn't mitigate the surprise he was feeling. At least the attempt wasn't useless, as he did notice something from the fight, something that could explain why his attacker seemed able to keep up with him speed-wise. Wanting to test his theory, he created 2 hands of chakra and sent them after his target. The latter, having seen the attack, proceeded to run around the battlefield, dodging the hunting hands that were after him. Knowing that sooner or later he would be caught if he didn't do something, he did several hand seals and tossed a large chunk of earth at the standing Naruto, forcing the latter to move too and lose his focus. What followed next was a running battle, as the two of them ran around the battlefield, one hurling balls of earth, the other extending his chakra arms to his target. Even kunais and shurikens were tossed, but none hit the mark. Seeing it didn't work, Naruto did another cross-shaped seal, and dozens of clones appeared in a line blocking the stranger path. Behind Naruto's opponent was the forest that wasn't touched by the earlier meteor. Each clone formed a Rasengan in their hand and ran at the retreating target. I can't believe he pushed me toward the forest without my notice. Could it be that he discovered my secret? The stranger wondered in alarm, as he was now jumping from tree to tree, with the clone quickly following behind. Without warning, he felt a sharp pain to his ribs and looked to see that another Naruto had wounded him with a kunai. A backhand later and the clone was dispelled. But that distraction was enough for the chasing clones behind him to close the gap and slam their Rasengan on him. An explosion later and the clones could only dumbly see as a charred log remained behind. Then out of nowhere, tigers made of earth chewed on them, dispelling them in the process. He looked around for a sign of Naruto but saw nothing. I have finally discovered how you were able to follow me all this time. Naruto's voice rang in the forest, startling the stranger. I must admit that if it wasn't for your overuse of this technique, I wouldn't have noticed. If you are so sure of yourself, why don't you come out then? The stranger yelled, as he didn't know where Naruto was. And lost the advantage I have now? Thanks, but no thanks. Mirth could be detected from the voice, annoying Naruto's attacker. It was quite clever of you though, using that devastating meteor attack first. Because of this, I thought it was easy for you to do something of that magnitude, thus proceeded with caution. But truthfully, you cannot use that attack as easily as you made it seems. What you were hoping from the attack was to destroy the forest we were in. Naruto's voice rang while his attacker's body stiffened. Of course, at first I thought it was to prepare the field for your earth attack. But that wasn't the main reason, was it? He asked mockingly, but didn't expect an answer, so he continued. The real reason was that by forcing me to constantly be in contact with the bare ground, I played right into your hands. Why? Because you use a special technique that allows you to know instantly what is directly touching the ground around you. With this, you always knew where I was. Now that we are in this forest, I don't need to touch the ground, and because of this, you don't know where I am, do you? The stranger looked around nervously. He found out. His body stiffened though when he heard a whisper behind his ear. It is over, Naruto said triumphantly as he plunged a big Rasengan on his attacker's back. The sphere of chakra quickly covered his target body before hurling him across the forest, then exploded outward in a raw display of chakra. Naruto waited until the dust was lifted to check on his opponent's body. But imagine his surprise when he saw the stranger standing still and looking at him with an angry gaze. He looked at his opponent's body and his eyes bulged as he noticed it was covered in a shining material that he easily recognized. The only part of the stranger's body that wasn't covered by the material was his face, his clothes having been destroyed by the attack. This was the second shock, because standing in front of him was none other than Utatane Kaharu with her body covered in diamond.
That's all for now. If you enjoy this video, then please like, share and do comments.